Well, hey there you. Yes, that's right, you sitting here watching this video right now. Thanks for clicking. This little message is just to say that this is a compilation video made from duct taping these two videos together and making a few minor edits so that I don't repeat myself too much. So if you've already watched these two, then I'm sorry, but there's no new content here. Still, if you just want a few hours of background noise and you like these games, then this may be the video for you. Anyway, I'll hand you back to Past Arkham from here, and maybe catch up with all of you at the end. Peace. Syberia is another of those titles that I've always meant to get to, and for whatever reason just didn't at the time. I remember seeing it on the shelves in stores and thinking, hey, that looks cool, I'll have to pick it up sometime, and then just not doing that. It originally came out in January 2002, which was something of a transformative moment in my life. In April of that year, I quit my first job and went backpacking around Canada and a little of the United States for around 5 months. So it certainly stands to reason that new games weren't the most pressing thing on my mind. Though I did manage 2 complete playthroughs of Shadow Hearts on my PlayStation 2 prior to going, and it remains my favourite JRPG even to this day. By the time I returned, Neverwinter Nights had been released, and my D&D group were planning to play some sessions of it online. Though this never actually panned out. Still, I got pretty hard into modding that game, and while I never finished or published anything, I was taking my earliest steps into game development. My point is, I had a lot going on. After you catch the travel bug, it's hard to imagine yourself having a normal life where you work to pay for a house so you can take a vacation 2 weeks out of the year. I had my sights set on returning to the wider world, an ambition that sees me living in Japan even today. So even though an adventure game of this nature seems to be absolutely perfect for me, especially since I was already a fan of the likes of Grim Fandango and The Longest Journey, it just didn't happen at the time. I don't think I gave it a second thought after that until I got them free on GOG some time ago. So once they were in my library, I was absolutely going to get around to them one day, along with all this stuff. This recent playthrough and review are, among other things, in response to comments in my Longest Journey video telling me to give this one a go, and the fact that I'm working on my own narrative adventure game of sorts. Don't think of this as some kind of announcement, it's all just placeholder assets and systems in Unity, and some background art in Blender. But it's a start. I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to cover these for the channel when I took my first tentative steps into Benoit Sokal's mysterious Clockpunk universe. But it was about the time I was in Barakstadt University negotiating with these 3 dorks that I realized just how charming this strange and cozy little game was, and how lost I'd become in the whole thing. So I took the trip all the way through the first 3 games before going back to record them for capture, and got to work making this for all you wonderful people who swing by to watch my aggressively lukewarm takes on everything and anything. So guys, if like I did with this game, you find yourself having a good time, then please leave a like and a comment. I especially love hearing other people's stories about their experiences with the games I'm talking about, and if you're new, why not hit that sub button and help get this channel up to 10k by the end of the year. Also, there's a couple of real money options to help support the channel if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it at all. This is still just a hobby, and all just for fun. Anyway, with the admin out of the way, and I actually wrote it into the script this time and didn't need to fix it later. Yeah, your boy is organized this time. Next thing you know, I'll even have clean underwear for once. Okay, jokes aside. Why don't we jump aboard an incredible mechanical train, wind the spring up nice and tight, and take a wild tour through one of the coldest and most inhospitable places on the planet, all on the off chance that a wild story about a land of blue grass and the last living mammoths can be found at the end of it all. Sound good? Then all aboard the Vorarlberg Express. This is Syberia. As mentioned, I played all these games on GOG. I am not an affiliate, and this isn't a sponsored video. I just like what they do, and I like not having any DRM in my games. I don't think I paid more than $10 for a single entry while they were on sale, and I was able to, for the most part, install them smoothly enough. The first Syberia game is surprisingly stable for a game of its age that hasn't had any kind of official HD remaster. I got the game free from GOG during a winter sale, I think. Anyway, after installing it, I didn't apply any mods or patches, didn't need to run the exe in compatibility mode or anything like that, and I did 2 full playthroughs without a single crash to desktop or bug. If you want to clean up the edges of the 3D characters, there are a couple of guides for getting it running in a kind of quasi-HD mode, but no one has done any kind of upscaling mod for it like the one I found for the longest journey back when I played it. Syberia 2 on the other hand has a few hitches. When I first fired it up, the game was running more or less at warp speed on account of the frame rate being so high. So I had to look up some guides and edit a .ini file in order to clamp the frame rate to 60 FPS and enable characters to actually finish their sentences. After that, I was also hit with multiple crashes whenever any of the long pre-rendered cutscenes played, and since this game doesn't have an autosave, I often found myself having to repeat fairly large chunks of the game until I got it into my head to save every few minutes. Unfortunately, I never found an actual fix for this. Usually after one crash, just restarting the game and going back to that cutscene meant that it would play without a hitch. If anyone knows of a surefire way to stop this from happening though, let me know in the comments. The only other issue I had is a very minor one, and one only really relevant to people who have multiple monitors set up. For whatever reason, the game doesn't lock your cursor to the game's monitor, and accidentally clicking on the second monitor will cause the game to minimize. This is only a minor inconvenience, as it only briefly breaks your immersion, but tabbing back into the game will sometimes balk your graphics. You can fix this just by walking into a different background though. It would have been much less of a problem if the game didn't hide your cursor during conversations, so I just had to get used to taking my hand off the mouse when people were talking, and being extra careful when clicking on scene transitions on the far left of the screen. Games are a team effort, combining the skills of numerous disciplines. While multi-skilled solo devs aren't all that hard to come across these days, the indie scene as we know it didn't exist back in the late 90s or the early 2000s. Prior to the arrival of 3D games, teams were kept relatively small and budgets relatively low, so keeping everyone on the same page wasn't as hard as it is in modern day AAA studios. This is why we don't have all that many rock stars or auteurs in the world of gaming. I'm sure you know a few: Sam Lake, Hideo Kojima, Sven Vincke, Rafael Colantonio, John Romero, Amy Hennig, Hironobu Sakaguchi, Shinji Mikami, Miyazaki, no, the other Miyazaki. Okay, so actually there's a few of these guys. But what makes them special? Why is it that in an industry that's very much a team effort, comprised of people who very often don't understand each other's jobs, and as such don't realize how the things they do in their job impact the people in other departments, or if you're an arsehole like Marty Stratton, you're well aware of the trouble you're causing, and are just a petty little vindictive goblin with an axe to grind for some reason. Sorry, I'm sure I'll delete that line in one of the edits. Probably. So you've got all these different cooks from all these different culinary disciplines, all trying to put their wildly different ingredients into the same pot, and somehow create something mind-blowingly beautiful, entertaining and fun to play, and not really knowing if it's all going to work out until they are too far committed to do anything about it once they realize they're producing a dud. What you need is a visionary. You need someone who can steer the ship and communicate exactly what it is they want from each branch of their game development team, while still allowing them enough creative freedom that they don't feel like they're working in some kind of code factory. Enter Benoit Sokal. While Benoit isn't quite the heavy hitter that some of the other names I've mentioned are, there's no denying that the real magic that sets Syberia apart comes from him. This is very much his world, and these are his characters, and his story, and through his incredible drawings and paintings, he was able to communicate what he wanted to his team, while still taking time to listen to the programmers and technical people, to understand what the limitations of the technology were at the time, and work around those to tell the story he wanted with as little compromise as possible. But who was this relatively unknown artist from Belgium who created such a cult classic of the adventure game genre. There isn't a massive amount of information on Benoit floating around on the internet. His Wikipedia entry is fairly short, but it does have quite a few links to both English and French interviews, and there are a few videos dedicated to his memory that I found on YouTube that help shed some light on his career and legacy. I'm not going to do what I usually do and put lots of citations here, but I'll link the individual things down in the description. Same with the videos. I'll throw up a little of them as B-roll, but I think you're all better off just going and looking into these things for yourself. Born in Brussels in 1954, he attended the Institute of St. Luc, where he studied to be an artist, and his early career was in the world of comics. Most notably, in the late 70s and early 80s, he wrote Inspector Canardo. This was something of a subversion of the film noir genre, telling the story of an alcoholic duck detective who solved mysteries in a world of anthropomorphic animals. Suffice to say, this wasn't some kind of kids comic. In one interview, Benoit talked about his experience with the medium of comics growing up. Once upon a time, comics were just for telling children's stories, but as the audience got older, and the kids who grew up reading those comics became the next generation of artists for them, the storytelling matured, and even ideas like the graphic novel, which sounds more mature than comic, started to get thrown around. He talks about this in context of how he also saw video games growing up from becoming much more than a child's toy. Benoit was progressive with his craft. He is apparently one of the first comic artists to use digital coloring to help speed up his process, though he laments having to use a mouse to do this. He also became interested in 3D modeling and animation, and began to get ideas about the kinds of stories or experiences he could create with these new tools. By his own admission though, being a comic artist was a lonely job. He would sit in his basement and spend all day drawing without speaking to anyone, and after 20 years of that, he was looking for a new frontier to explore for himself, one where he could work with other people. This is what led him to pitching a kind of interactive CD-ROM experience to his publisher. A small idea that would be made by a small team, one that blew up into a 4-year project that produced Amazon: The Explorer's Legacy. Since I'm writing this in April of 2025, we are not far out from getting a full remake of this game, and I'm hoping they land it. While the original is still something of a unique and interesting experience, it hasn't aged as well as some games. I will be calling back to this game a little later in the review, but I think it's something I'd rather talk about if I get the remake. Anyway, the game was something of a surprise commercial success, which left the door open for another more ambitious project, which is how we got Syberia. I feel Benoit's abilities as an artist are what really make this game something special. While games from large studios have, at least for the time being, concept artists to help visualize a creative director's ideas, Benoit could show his team exactly what he wanted, completely unfiltered in any way. His work as a comic artist gave him an eye for composition and dramatic shots, which no doubt helped finding those perfect angles for those pre-rendered backgrounds. His artwork also features heavily within much of the game, and adds to the distinctive personality of the world and its tone. As such, these places and stories really feel like the creative vision of one very passionate person, and not some design by committee monstrosity that is completely incoherent, or the blandest flavor of vanilla you could imagine. Having a creative artist as your lead doesn't always work though. The technical side is where you're going to come up against limitations, and making mistakes here is what can lead to days or even weeks of work being scrapped and redone. In the Skyrim and Fallout mod scene, we are always very skeptical of ideas guys with no modding experience or skills of their own, looking for a team of artists and coders to basically boss around, because they have no concept of how much time it will take to implement their ideas, or how much of that work will be wasted in the event the would-be auteur changes their mind about something. There are numerous stories of nightmare game development cycles led by these kinds of people. Fortunately, Benoit was always willing to listen to his programmers. He would explain what he wanted from the game in all its glory, and when they brought him back down to earth of what was possible, he would find a way to compromise and work within those limitations. This kind of communication is critical in game development, and there's no doubt the small team size of Amazon and Syberia alike helped a lot here. I think this is also a big part of the reason we have so many AAA flops coming out of the gate these days. Teams and budgets are too big, publishers are too scared to innovate, and no one is really steering the ship. This leads to games that lack any kind of personality or charm. At best, you might enjoy them once and never touch them again. Meanwhile, a 20-something-year-old point-and-click adventure still has a massive cult following and can even charm the pants off new players today. I was also amused to learn that Benoit considered he had learnt nothing from each game that he could bring to the next. He explained that when you were starting the next game, you could be with a completely new team, working with new technology and new ideas, but also he himself was changing as a person. He was getting older, and his writing and art were also evolving and changing. So he approached each new game as if it were the first one. On the 28th of May, 2021, Benoit Sokal passed away after a battle with a long-term illness. While the man is gone, he has left one hell of a legacy through his work, and no doubt inspired countless others to try and do the same. Now that we're getting into the story, I think we should talk about potential spoilers for anyone here who isn't on a nostalgia trip. Since Syberia 2 picks up right where the first game leaves off, then we absolutely have to talk about the first game's ending here. I've played around with the script and edited it a few times, but this seems to be the only way I can really do it. I'll keep some of the second game's bigger revelations confined to a specific spoiler section towards the end. But just be aware going forward that we are going to be talking about the first game's major plot points in their entirety. I know these games are old, but there are plenty of older gamers like me who may have just let it pass them by for various reasons. Okay, so let's talk about this opening. Benoit didn't waste any time sucking us into his strange clockpunk version of our world. And in the opening cinematic, we see this very strange procession of automatons marching in what can best be described as a mockery of human motion as they carry what seems to be a coffin into a nearby cemetery. If I didn't know better, I'd think this absolutely unholy procession was warning me that I was about to step into some kind of horror game concerning clockwork nightmares. This bizarre parade is observed by a solitary figure standing in the rain. A woman whose suitcase indicates she has travelled far to get here. We follow her as she approaches her hotel, where she is greeted by another automaton crudely pantomiming human movement, before she finally steps inside out of the rain. In this moment, we are thrust into the shoes of Catherine, Kate Walker, a New York lawyer who has travelled to the small village of Valladolid in the Alps to oversee the transfer of the once famous Vorarlberg automaton factory from its last living heirs to the American-based Universal Toy Company. After meeting a couple of the locals of this very sleepy town, Kate Walker has the first monkey wrench thrown into her plans when it's explained that the funeral procession she saw while she was coming into town was actually for Anna Vorarlberg, the person Kate is here to meet, who, unfortunately, passed away not long before her arrival. After having this dropped on her, she is escorted to her room where a phone call to her boss puts into sharp perspective what exactly she's expected to do here. This isn't some free holiday in France. This is a simple contract signing. Kate Walker is expected to be in and out in just over a day with the deal done and dusted, and her boss is eager to remind her that this is important.
Listen to me, Kate. Universal Toys is one of our biggest clients, and I don't care how weird that town is. All that matters is that you do not set foot back in New York before you've tied up the deal. Get the picture.
When Miss Walker lays the bad news on her boss though, he explains that this has already been planned for on account of Anna's seniority, and it should be a simple matter of speaking to her notary who can sign over the factory on the family's behalf. So with the rain cleared up, our heroine takes her first steps out into the sleepy little mountain village and has to wrestle with another of the odd little clockwork contraptions that inhabits this place. This sees her coming face to face with the town's aging and somewhat infirm legal representative, who is about to drop the mother of all bombshells on Miss Walker's plans to get this contract signed and rush off back to her superficial world of lattes and fashion sales. You see, Anna Vorarlberg has been keeping something of a dark family secret for a long time. As the notary explains, and is further backed up by a document he presents to her, Anna had a little brother named Hans, who died in an accident when he was younger. At least, that's what Anna's father wanted everyone to think. We'll unpack Vorarlberg Sr. later, but it seems his son didn't die, but actually ran away from home when he was around 18. Rather than tell people the truth of this, an elaborate hoax was staged complete with a closed casket funeral to declare Hans dead and expunged from the family. Anna was not only fully aware of this, she was in fact in semi-regular contact with Hans via an elaborate music box that he constructed for them to send recorded messages to each other. You see, Hans is not only alive and well, he's also something of a genius, and many of the automaton designs that made the factory and the Vorarlberg family so successful were his. According to Anna's letter, it would seem that Hans is still alive, and as of their last communication, somewhere in Syberia. The notary apologizes for the inconvenience and suggests Miss Walker explore Anna's office in the factory to see if she can find any more information there. And well, that's when things start to get weird. Even more weird than this. On the grounds of the factory and estate, we can uncover several interesting things that shed light on the situation. One is an incredibly long diary written by Anna that explains that when they were children, Hans had a near fatal fall while the two of them were exploring a cave cut into the mountains near the town. They had found cave paintings of mammoths, and Hans had spotted what seemed to be some kind of ancient carving or figurine of one and tried to climb to reach it. After spending many days in a coma, Hans awoke a much quieter young man, and it was soon discovered that his physical and mental growth would be forever stunted as a result of what happened. Suffice to say, his father wasn't all that happy to discover this. Now, the short version of this, because believe me, there is a lot, is that Hans developed two interesting traits out of his experience. One was a knack for mechanical clockwork things. While he was never able to grasp reading and writing and had limited communication prowess overall, his ability to turn metal cogs into seemingly living things was beyond genius, as we'll soon discover. He also had a fixation with mammoths and especially enjoyed creating clockwork ones. This actually became one of the many sore points between him and his father. Vorarlberg Sr. wanted Hans putting his talents to things for the factory rather than seeming flights of fancy and imagination. This led to some absolutely abusive behaviour and ended with Hans fleeing his home, the country, and rushing off to anywhere he could learn more about his favourite historical animals. Further exploring the area, we find a magnificent clockwork locomotive stationed on a platform near the factory, and when we actually enter the factory, we are in for one hell of a surprise. This is Oscar. And look, I understand that these clockwork automatons, while probably rare in modern day New York, are still something of a known quantity to Kate Walker, as this factory and its products were world famous once upon a time, but staring down and talking to what is clearly some kind of near perfect AI, or possibly actually conscious machine, that's made entirely from cogs and springs, and not absolutely losing your shit, is one hell of an achievement. Okay, I'm not going to pull this game up on realism too much because 1, we'll be here all day, and 2, where the hell would be the fun in that? The childlike wonder of this story is a big part of its appeal. So, yes, this is our soon-to-be best friend, train engineer, conductor, and all-around stickler for the rules. Through our conversation with Oscar and our exploration of Anna's office, we come to realise that this train is bound for wherever Hans is. And it's at this moment that something stirs inside Kate Walker. Yes, on one hand, she still has an arsehole boss to keep happy, and is working a fairly high pressure contract. But the call to adventure has been sounded. Kate Walker could have cried uncle and ran back to New York at this point. But something wakes up right about here.
I have decided to come along for the ride, Oscar. Ready when you are.
So that's our setup. After jumping through a lot, and I mean a lot of hoops, Kate Walker is able to convince Oscar to let her ride the train all the way to wherever it's going. And along the way, she's going to be faced with all kinds of challenges that she never imagined she'd have to deal with, seeing a world she never even knew existed, and coming to realize that just because you have the kind of life that everyone tells you you should want, a sensible job with good money, and big future prospects, a safe boyfriend who'll be fine until you can no longer overlook what an arsehole he is, friends who want to talk about shopping and sales, and all of the other stuff society tells us is important, it doesn't mean for a second you are actually happy, or being true to yourself. So what is Syberia really about? Well, it's about exploring a strange and interesting variation of our world. It's about solving puzzles and overcoming challenges to progress the story. It's about travelling through a part of the world that has been forgotten and helping the people there who are also at risk of being forgotten forever. It's about an old man's madcap dream to find the last surviving mammoths on a small forgotten island somewhere, but more importantly, Syberia is about self-discovery and self-actualization. It's about realizing that the world is far bigger and more interesting than you could possibly have imagined, and in doing so, wondering if you could ever return to the tiny slice of reality you once thought embodied everything. Syberia is about Kate Walker. So, who is our heroine? Well, as mentioned in the setup, she's a lawyer from New York working for the Marson and Lamont law practice. She's a city girl who's got a long-term boyfriend named Dan, who seems to exist in similar work and social circles to her. She's interested in shopping and lattes, and keeps in touch with her mother, who seems like a wonderful person, if a little self-absorbed. And yet, something deep inside absolutely yearns for more. Something is aware that she is being stifled by her career and miserable in her relationship. She is trapped by societal pressure and absolutely begging for something to come along and just push her over the edge into a world of adventure and discovery. Some rational part of Kate Walker may tell herself that at the start, she's chasing hens across the biggest country in the world so she can do her job and make her boss happy. But the truth is, she's been waiting for the call to adventure her whole life. And as someone who around 10 years ago packed up his whole life into one backpack and moved to the opposite side of the world from where he was born, I can relate to that very well. Like most well-made game characters, we learn a lot about her just through her actions. Sure, we the player are just solving puzzles because we're playing the game, but Kate is staring down very real problems that are causing her very real distress, and yet she hardly ever seems to complain or get angry, though she sometimes gets a little frustrated with Oscar.
You can be a real stickler for the rules, Oscar, my old fellow.
Still, it's the little phone calls back to New York that really tell us the most about Kate Walker. If not where she's going, then at the very least where she's from. Her boss, Mr. Marston, is something of an arsehole, for example. I wouldn't last 10 minutes working for this guy before speaking very frankly about his attitude towards his workers and vacating the premises. I understand that being a lawyer is something of a high-pressure job, and signing a contract, while seemingly mundane on the surface, concerns a lot of money changing hands. But at no point anywhere, in any work contract, do you sell your self-respect to a company. No one is allowed to treat you like you are less than human for any reason. Okay, if an employee isn't performing to a satisfactory standard, there are procedures that should be followed that can include termination of the employment. But that doesn't include shouting down your phone at them, derision, and generally being a condescending bully.
What do you think you're doing, Kate? I wanted updates. I wanted results.
Marsden honestly comes across as a little baby having a tantrum. And okay, how could he possibly imagine that Kate has been whisked across Eastern Europe on a whimsical clockwork train to find the person she needs to sign this contract? But for someone sitting in an office on the other side of the world with almost zero information on the situation, he sure has some strong opinions on how easy all of this is supposed to be.
No buts, Walker. You're looking for a senile old creek and you're making heavy weather of it.
Okay, he's a businessman, and he has a right to protect his business interests. But I've never understood at what point a manager or boss starts looking at their subordinates and stops seeing complex human beings worthy of respect and empathy. But he isn't the biggest crybaby of the bunch, because we've got to talk about Kate Walker's love life and what a train wreck that is.
Hello?
Kate?
Dan, I'm so pleased to hear your voice.
Dan is what we might call a throwaway boyfriend. At the start of the game, we are meant to get the impression that Kate Walker has a lot of ties back to her life in New York, and cutting these loose is going to form a big part of her character development. She has her job, her mother, friends, and a relationship that seems to be going places. We don't know a lot about Dan, but we get the impression that he has a similar career to Kate. That's great, right? They are on equal footing financially. He's got his shit together with his career, and they seem to want similar things out of life. He seems wonderfully safe. He's exactly the kind of guy Kate should marry if she's looking to be divorced before she's 40 with a child. There's a big difference between love and codependency, and just because someone seems like a good match doesn't mean there's anything real there. Especially when he's a gaslighting arsehole.
It doesn't matter, honey. Promise me that you will never put me in that state again. You're usually so delightful.
Dan clearly wants Kate Walker to operate her life around his schedule. Now, okay, in his defense, everyone thought this trip to Europe was at best a 2-day trip to sign some papers and rush off back to the office. But the moment things go upside down, he shows absolutely no concern or compassion for her situation, and instead starts complaining about how all this is going to inconvenience him. So, just listen to this.
Everything going as planned?
Yeah, well, not really. It's not exactly what I thought it would be. Everything's so different here.
Actually, while we're on the subject, I managed to free myself up tomorrow lunchtime. I'll come and meet you at the airport. I hope the flight from Paris won't be delayed. We're expected at the Goldbergs about 8 o'clock. I hope you have the time to take a shower and change, my poor honey bun.
Dan, I don't think the Goldbergs tomorrow night is really on.
Don't worry, Kate. You'll be as perfect as ever. Anyway, you never have to wear much to look really great.
Dan, I'm going to have to extend my stay here. There's 1 or 2 complications. You understand?
Kate, honey, what are you talking about? It's only a measly toy factory.
The sale isn't going through as expected. I've got to stay a bit longer. Dan, you don't mind, do you?
But Katie, you can't do this to me. It's the Goldberg contract. There's millions of dollars on the line here.
Notice how he's really not listening to her. Notice how quickly he wants to get onto the subject of what he wants to do, and then he acts like it's her fault she can't come rushing back to New York to sit on his arm to talk to the Goldbergs or whatever that is. You got a real gem there, honey. An absolute keeper. Dan goes on to display such traits from the Andrew Tate book of masculinity as sulking.
Dan, I was going to call you.
Yeah.
Telling his girl to keep her head down and not stand out.
I don't know why you accepted it in the first place. If you just stuck to the middle of the road, then we wouldn't be in this mess.
Backhanded non-apologies.
Yeah, sure. Getting carried away never solves anything, does it? I must say I felt really dumb when I hung up.
Really?
Yeah, I left the door to my office open and I was convinced everybody around heard me.
Oh. I'm so embarrassed, Dan. Please say I'm sorry to your colleagues from me.
Along with a lot of whining about when is she coming home.
So when are you coming home? Are you coming home soon? So, are you coming back soon? But don't you think it's time that you came home? Hurry home, huh?
Meanwhile, Kate is exploring parts of the world she never imagined could exist, and having her horizons blown the hell open. But there's one more player in this drama.
Kate? Is that you?
Well, yeah, who did you think it was?
I didn't recognize your voice, that's all. Must be the distance or something. So, spill the beans. What's Europe like?
Olivia works with Kate at the law firm, and she on the surface seems like a nice, superficial New York girl who matches well with Kate Walker's superficial New York persona. She likes office gossip, shopping, more gossiping, and seems quite eager to stick her nose into her friend's affairs when she sees the boat rocking between her and her boyfriend.
I'm not talking about that. I want to know what's going on with Dan.
What do you mean?
I bumped into him at Maggie's do and he said you'd argued.
I don't hate this girl. Well, I didn't at the start anyway. But she feels like what Kate Walker could have become had she let the spark of adventure die in her. I try not to be too judgmental. We are all products of the lives we lead, and even in the information age, it's not always easy to become aware of a bigger, wider world beyond the confines of that which is directly in front of us. We can see these amazing places all around the world and hear about all these different cultures or become interested in learning other languages and then tell ourselves it's something we'll take care of later. A later that usually never comes. We all have needs. We need to get jobs, pay rent, plan for our futures, and so on. So it's completely understandable that our worldview can become very narrow. I once worked with a guy who'd spent a good stint of time in Tokyo, a place I'm considering moving to myself, and I asked him about his experience there. He summed it up as, you live in one of the biggest and most exciting cities in the world, and exist between 3 train stations, that being your home, your job, and your local bar. so it's not some inexcusable waste of human life to turn out this way. But I certainly wouldn't be coming back for a second date if I matched with this girl on Tinder, that's for sure. Olivia basically uses Kate's absence and her fights with Dan to snipe the guy. What a friend, right? She talks like it's just something that happened, that they were asteroids that just fell into the same orbit and spun closer and closer until the inevitable happened. But no, absolutely not. She wanted this to happen. And so did he, let's be real here, and she went after it. What turned me against her the most at the end though is how she goes about confessing to Kate. You might think, wow, she's so brave and honest, but this too was a completely selfish act.
Oh, Kate, you're gonna hate me. Please hate me.
She couldn't handle her guilt, and the only way she can feel better about it in the long run is if Kate is mad at her. She isn't confessing because she's truly sorry, she's doing it because she wants to feel better about herself. Oh, I did something bad, but now I'm doing the right thing and owning up to it, so I can look myself in the mirror again now, right? Absolutely despicable behaviour.
Kate, what happened to you, my poor munchkin? I've been trying to contact you for hours.
I have no problems with Kate's mother though. She seems like a wonderful person, and I hope things work out for her and her single boyfriend. Still, all of these characters are constantly telling Kate that something is changing, and she seems different than before.
Why did you say that I've changed?
I don't know, just an impression. You sound more sure of yourself, like stronger, more confident.
Something Kate is kinda seeing, but nowhere near as much as the others. Just like Walter White's monster in Breaking Bad, the adventurer inside Kate Walker has always been there, always waiting for its moment to shine, and it just took the right set of circumstances for her to step out of the shadows and show the world what she's really made of. I sort of miss these little phone calls in the second game. Marsden and Kate's mother try to get in touch periodically, and her law firm actually sends a private detective to track her down, which we'll talk about as we get into the second game a little deeper. But for the most part, Kate Walker is happy to tell people that things have changed and she's not coming home. And just like any great hero, even if she did, she wouldn't be the same person, and it's unlikely that the person she becomes through this adventure would be even remotely satisfied with the life she used to have. From Valladolid, we are rushed off to Barokstadt University, a place where we'll learn a great deal about mammoths and have to overcome a few challenges. You see, we are now actually taking some version of the journey Hans Vorarlberg took himself after escaping his father and his home. This becomes apparent by just how many of his wondrous clockwork creations we keep stumbling into along the way. It would seem that Hans has been planning this journey for a very long time, and even left several winding keys for his train positioned at stations along the way. At the university, we discover that Hans, while not an actual enrolled student, spent a lot of time here learning about mammoths and ancient hunter-gatherer cultures. Due to a slight miscalculation, we actually pull up just short of the key and need to jump through quite a few hoops, learn about birds and plants from the Amazon, told you we'd be back here eventually, and deal with these three gentlemen who between them seem to share a perfect memory of every student who ever attended their university. I think I met my university dean once for graduation, and he looked about as bored as I felt at the time. We also attend a lecture to learn about the Yukol people, who now inhabit the northernmost parts of Siberia. Historically, in this story, they are believed to have been the only ancient hunter-gatherer tribe to have domesticated the mammoth and had something of a symbiotic relationship with them. According to this tribe's legends, they actually created a ship, an ark of sorts, to carry a small group of mammoths to an island far north of Siberia, where they supposedly still exist today. At least that's the short version of it. But it's here we start to get a vague hint of what Hans Vorarlberg might be looking for. Beyond Barokstadt, we visit Komkoldsgard, an abandoned mine that was once staffed almost entirely by Hans's automatons, and has plenty of other evidence of his passing to find too. And then we go to Arlbad, the once famous luxury resort that has long since been forgotten about. Here, we get mixed up in a dastardly scheme run by this bizarre masked man with an obsession for an old Russian opera singer to basically have her come and perform for him and his clockwork audience, so he can kidnap her and keep her in a cage for the remainder of her senior years. You know, maybe this is a horror game after all. This is a little off topic, but the way Kate Walker gets roped into this is that our fiendish genius steals Oscar's hands from him so that they can be attached to his automaton to play this elaborate organ. Yeah, creepy, right? Now, during our daring escape, we recover the hands simply by taking a screwdriver to the automaton. A screwdriver that we picked up shortly after entering the building in the first place. And the organ player is like, right there. But, you know, his sleeves aren't rolled up, so I guess we gotta launch a guy into space and ride a zeppelin to Arlbad to subject a very senior and fragile lady to a traumatic experience. Well, at least she got to sing one last time. I just want to say that the fact that I just wrote that sentence is exactly why I love these games. It's absurd, and somehow it works. So when the final bombs go off and the train speeds off to its destination, when Kate Walker's boss is telling her what a failure she is and how he was wrong to trust her, at that moment, we finally meet Hans Vorarlberg.
Mr. Vorarlberg? Hans Vorarlberg?
You've brought the train then. That's good.
While Hans is certainly in his senior years, he still talks much like a child. Things are very simple to him. He made the train, he made Oscar, and now he's going to the island of Syberia to finally see mammoths. Oddly though, at that moment he asks Kate Walker if she's coming with him.
Kate Walker?
Yes, Mr. Vorarlberg?
Are you coming on the train too, Kate Walker?
And I think it's here that the last thread holding her back to her old life snaps in her. While it takes a little time to truly sink in, she comes to understand just how much this journey has changed her, and, as we'll talk about later, how much the life she left behind isn't even there for her to go back to now. Even as she tells him she can't go, you can hear the yearning in her voice to continue. Why go back to New York? Why be a lawyer? Why not throw it all away in a single act of madness or passion and run off on a wondrous clockwork train piloted by a seemingly sentient automaton and help a strange old man fulfill an impossible dream of finding a legendary island that isn't listed on any map where the last remnants of an extinct species are supposed to be. Oh, do you even have to ask? Syberia 2 picks up a matter of days after the first game finishes. Kate Walker, Hans and Oscar are all aboard the wondrous clockwork train that is speeding across northern Syberia, a land that is getting colder and colder. While it may have been easy for her to cut loose from her life in New York, that life is looking to come and get her. Her employers are trying to get her back, and they're now in the process of hiring a private detective to hunt her down. I'm going to give Marsden the benefit of the doubt here. He may have Kate's mother breathing down his neck, and he might also be interested in knowing about his contract. But the fact is, from his perspective, he sent a promising young woman to Europe to take care of a simple contract signing, and somehow she wound up jumping around over half of Eastern Europe looking for some guy who's supposed to be dead, saying some pretty wild stuff, breaking up with her boyfriend and best friend, before simply telling her boss she was never coming back. While she was in Russia. So as the Vorarlberg Express pulls into the station at Romansburg, her old firm hires detective Nick Canton to head out there and find her. What an awesome name. I bet he looks so cool. Never mind. As per usual, now that we've stopped, we've got to wind the train's spring. Great. I wonder what absurdities will stop us from achieving that this time. Well, damn, that was easy. Okay, Oscar, let's go, bro.
That's impossible, Kate Walker.
Why, Oscar?
Soon we shall be confronting extremely cold temperatures, Kate Walker. We shall need coal to keep ourselves warm.
This time you're not wrong, Oscar. It is a bit nippy.
As soon as you have filled the coal car, we can set out again, Kate Walker.
I'll see what I can do.
Well, that's a new one at least. Romansburg is the last bastion of civilization this far north. Beyond here it's nothing but snow and wild animals, until we finally reach the Sokal tribe. And remember, this is a part of the world that can get down below minus 25 degrees Celsius. No, I won't use inferior nonsensical American measurements. So this is something of an important last stop for the train. We are also establishing a few important points here. First is that Hans's health is failing, and one way or another, this is his last trip. We are also flexing our slightly more powerful game engine that can now create a world that at least feels somewhat lived in, and introducing the villains of this particular piece. These two, you know what, I've been playing a lot of Planescape recently, so I'll call them Burks. These two Burks, named Ivan and Igor Burgov. I'll talk a little more about these guys later. Similar to Sergei in the first game, they're somewhat over-the-top caricature type villains, but where Sergei was almost pitiful, Ivan is someone I absolutely despise, which is on account of some good writing and characterization. They first cause problems for us when we need some gasoline for a generator, and they're the only guys with any available. Remember, this is the kind of place that is so remote that when things are out of stock, it could be weeks or even months before they're restocked. And, okay you say, it's their gasoline, surely it's up to them what they do with it. And yeah, but this is a small, far-flung community. People tend to help each other out, if only because doing so will mean they won't be left out in the cold themselves if things take a turn for the worse. When talking to Ivan the first time, he doesn't even give a reason why he doesn't want to share. He acts lecherous first, and then tells Kate to shove off without even being willing to negotiate. It's that kind of spiteful behaviour that punctuates all his actions, and is ultimately how this guy got under my skin. So once we have the train stocked with coal and are ready to pull out, Hans has something of a seizure and is taken to his bed. And this isn't a place that's overflowing with stocks of medicine, and the closest thing to a doctor they have are some monks with some very odd customs. Still, Kate is able to navigate this strange order's rituals, and thanks to some Sokal herbal medicine, is able to bring Hans back to consciousness. They have a dramatic escape from the monastery, and just when it seems all is well and we can finally get on our merry way, real disaster strikes. While Kate Walker is fixing a clockwork horse attraction on Hans's behalf, Ivan and Igor move in and swipe the train, taking Hans and Oscar with them and charging off into the north, leaving Kate behind to figure out how she's going to catch up to them. A problem she manages to solve with all the style we've come to expect from her. So, our major stakes for this part of the adventure are now established. We are now involved in a kind of race to catch up with the train, Oscar and Hans, and liberate them from their captors, thwart whatever their intentions are, and finally get this train to the Sokal village so we can take the trip to the island of Syberia. While Kate Walker is our heroine and point of view character, she's not the only person involved in this adventure. Our best bro on this wild journey is Oscar. Now, ignoring the absurdity of a clockwork automaton that has a more sophisticated personality than modern day large language models, Oscar is just great.
Oscar, see you later, alligator.
In a while, Kate Walker.
He's taking up the comic relief role here for sure, but he's not some jester who's just around to be the butt of every joke. In fact, Oscar displays far more empathy towards Kate Walker than either Dan or Olivia do, and is surprisingly sweet at times. When we first meet him in Valladolid, we have to wrestle with his strict adherence to the rules of his programming, though this seems somewhat performative. Either Oscar began developing his personality very early on, or he was programmed with a fair amount of flexibility in mind. He has absolutely no reason to help Kate Walker at all, and yet he stumbles upon these seeming loopholes in his programming that allow him to point out how she might go about taking the train herself in Anna's place.
One ticket. What is your final destination?
I don't know. It's you who told me I had to get a ticket.
A ticket to travel, then.
He still refuses to leave until we've acquired several important items, though. I guess I could write it off as his directives to get the train to Aralbad overruling his other directives, but I also like to think he may be in the early stages of developing something akin to a soul. There's a wonderful opportunity here for me to segue into speculating on the nature of consciousness, and how we might never be able to tell if an AI is truly conscious or simply imitating it perfectly. But I'm gonna stay on track with this one. While Oscar always has some excuse or another to not actually get off the train and help Kate Walker actually solve some of the problems she's up against,
I am obliged to avoid exposing my wheelwork to corrosive bird excreta.
And he's not even close to being the Terminator.
Why, it is absolutely inadmissible, intolerable, and indescribable. I have been attacked.
We do start to develop something like a connection or even a bond with our wondrous mechanical man. His personality quirks become features rather than bugs. In fact, as he says himself about automatons,
automatons do not have bugs, Kate Walker. They simply display functional idiosyncrasies.
But he's also just a friendly ear to listen to our heroine's concerns. At the start of Syberia 2, in our first conversations with him, he refuses to get into topics of Hans's health and the likelihood of success of their mission. And again, this could just be his programming, but it sounds an awful lot like he's trying to deflect this conversation from topics he finds difficult and emotional to deal with. Whether or not he's just imitating human behaviour, Oscar comes across as a far better human being than Kate's boyfriend. Suffice to say, I like this guy. And I don't like him in spite of his eccentricities. I like him because of them. I always enjoyed asking him to help, just to hear what wonderful excuse he'd come up with this time. While Oscar is a great bro though, the real reason for this section is to talk about the villains of the piece. There are many ways to write a villain, and how you go about it rather depends on what you want to achieve. Not every villain needs to be a hateful creature on the level of, say, Suguru Kamoshida or Lucas Baker, though one guy in these games did get under my skin in the same way these guys did. Sergei Borodin is the first antagonist we come across later in the first game. The man is a walking collection of red flags, and something of an over-the-top comic book villain. It's entirely possible he's aware of this fact too, given how much he leans into the role. I mean, listen to that laugh. We encounter him shortly after winding the train at Komkolsgrad mine, after he steals Oscar's hands. He explains that he worked here back when the mine was operational, and was basically left to steward the place after it was shut down, and it seems he, just like the mine and the space station connected to it, have been truly forgotten about. I mean, I guess someone is signing off on those paychecks, and making sure food and alcohol shows up at the place periodically, but maybe it's all just been lost in the system somewhere. Sergei has used his isolation to fixate on a specific moment in his life, when the great opera singer Helena Romansky performed at the mine, and has used his free time and resources to transform the place into a grand organ that can be played by automaton, so that Helena can return and give another amazing performance. He's absolutely convinced that if he builds this thing, she'll come because... Because. In fact, he offloads Helena's arrival onto Kate Walker, which leads to her exploring Sergei's personal shrine to this singer. If the cartoonish mask he wears, or the fact that he dedicated his time to the construction of this elaborate organ wasn't setting off alarm bells, well, surely this place would? This basically jumpstarts the final chapter of the first game, which sees Kate flying to Aralbad on this incredible clockwork zeppelin to try to convince Helena to come to Komkolsgrad to perform, where this happens. Damn, if only there'd been some kind of red flags warning us that this guy was a total psychopath. In Syberia 2, our first rather amusing antagonist is the patriarch of the monastery in Romansburg. When Hans becomes dangerously ill, the closest thing in the area to a doctor is this man. But he's a man of a lot more faith than he is charity. We hear from this little girl Malka that when her mother was very sick, he wouldn't even try to help her because in his words, her illness wasn't serious enough for their attention and she should just accept God's plan. I bet it never occurred to him once that if God's plan is a thing, then it was God's plan that brought the sick to his doorstep so he could heal them. But whatever. There are hoops to jump through just to get the patriarch to even look at Hans, and when he is finally brought to the monastery, it's basically to oversee his passing. I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but we're all clear that this is what Mother Teresa's real deal was at this point, right? Like, she wasn't helping the sick get better at all. There were no doctors in any of her... Anyway, let's just get back to the story. With the help of some shamanic mumbo-jumbo, Kate is able to rouse Hans and break his fever, and the pair of them have a dramatic escape in a coffin sled ride down the side of a mountain, while this guy screams, "Stop him! He's supposed to die!"
Stop him! He's supposed to die!
And shakes his fist like Dick Dastardly. Ivan and Igor though, well, that's another issue entirely. Igor I can take or leave. Like Hans, he's also intellectually stunted, but unlike Hans, he doesn't seem to have any great talents beyond his physical size, and a lifetime of being guided around by his wretched goblin of a brother has given him a somewhat skewed sense of morality. It's Ivan that I absolutely despise though. I've already introduced him as a spiteful and petty little wretch, but it's later in the game that he really got under my skin. This pair steal the train, Oscar and Hans, and ride off into the north for... ivory. That's it. They just want a payday. Ivan is in many ways the antithesis of Hans and Kate. Hans is trying to fulfill some kind of long-held childhood dream. He's constructed so many wonderful things that have brought joy and wonder to so many people. Seriously, wait until we talk about the world before. Kate is helping Hans because of a sense of adventure and genuine empathy and compassion for this odd little man and his seemingly impossible quest. They are rushing to the edge of the world to explore the ultimate mystery of what if? What if somehow, someway, the stories were actually true? And given I consider the journey equal to, if not greater than the destination, I can't think of any truer way to live one's life. Ivan though, he's just a selfish wretch looking to get rich, and he doesn't care who he hurts or what he destroys along the way. When we catch up to the train after seeing the thugs ride off on a snowbike with a sick senior citizen restrained to it, we find the place wrecked. I recall feeling a real sense of violation here. This once adorable little bastion of warmth and comfort in the endless snow and cold has been broken and ruined in the name of greed and spite. Oscar is pushed from his train and left to freeze in the snow by someone who couldn't care less for anything that isn't going to make him a penny richer. And finally, I have to condemn my little home cart to the void for the sake of their hubris and greed. But that wasn't even the worst of it. No, the worst was this line here.
Ha ha, Kate Walker! The ivory's ours.
The man cannot conceive of any other reason people would be travelling into the north save for ivory and wealth. He thinks Kate is like him, which frankly gave me massive ick. I think that's what the kids say these days. Yeah, I'm cool. Based. That's like another word, right? Ivan goes on to abandon his brother and even to try to kill Kate before apparently falling to his death. He makes another appearance right towards the end on the Ural arc that's heading to the island of Syberia. And at that point, I was just so done with this guy. I understand awful people constantly being able to dodge the consequences of their actions in the real world. It's not that hard if you've got enough money. But in stories, the villains are supposed to get their comeuppance, and I was so far past dealing with this guy's shit. Still, his karma does catch up to him quite dramatically in the end. I wonder if there are any recorded accounts of death by penguin. Okay, we're back. I definitely didn't just spend the last hour looking at pictures of penguins. So, let's talk about the setting. Syberia often feels like a walking tour of this strange, forgotten part of the world where everything is old and trapped in a memory of a time long ago when it mattered to someone. Think of all those seaside resorts that once upon a time played host to thousands of tourists every year and slowly became obsolete when commercial airline travel became affordable to the working class. Those places whose day has long passed, but somehow they didn't get the memo about it, and the people working there just keep on chugging along like nothing has changed, and occasionally wondering why everything is kinda outdated, dusty, and in need of repair. That's the world we're exploring now. From the very beginning in the sleepy town of Valladolid all the way to Arrelbad, these seem less like real places and more like the memory or even dream of a much greater place that once was. One that is slowly disintegrating and preparing to be paved over and forgotten about. Now, there's no doubt that the game's budget and limitations of the engine played into this. There's no way in hell that a mid-budget game that came out in the early 2000s was going to be pulling off anything like, say, Shenmue in terms of displaying a living world.
Saijo-san, do you know any places where sailors like to hang out around here?
However, whether by design or as a way to use the game's limitations to their advantage, having only a few characters in these environments, even at the university lecture, helped to create this bizarre and... I learnt a new word when I was watching interviews about this series, so I'm going to use it here. Oniric world. So let's talk pre-rendered backgrounds for a moment. If you know me, you know I love these, and I like to harp on about how awesome they are, were, and still can be every chance I get. Most of you will probably know them from classic Resident Evil, or, if you're especially cool, even earlier games like Alone in the Dark or Bioforge. Essentially, to cut down on the processing power needed to show detailed backgrounds, environments are modeled, textured, and rendered in a separate program on a very powerful PC to create what was probably some of the best a certain era could produce. Well, kinda anyway. Remember that these images need to be relatively small and compressed in such a way that it can all fit onto a CD-ROM and be rendered quickly by the hardware of the era. In the game engine, only simple collision geometry and character models exist, and a special texture called a depth pass, or a Z-pass, is used to tell the machine if the character model is supposed to be in front of or behind something, though failing that, a simple textured 2D plane can act as a kind of mask for this kind of stuff too. One more touch to add extra life to these environments is to have low-res pre-rendered video playing over the image to create the likes of these birds flying around. The main drawback to these kinds of backgrounds is that they can appear kind of dead, and the character models can seem to be separate from them. Which they are, of course, but still. Resident Evil Remake really managed to nail it through its art direction and use of dynamic lighting and shadows to really set the characters into the backgrounds. But Syberia isn't quite on that level. I'm not for a second implying it's immersion breaking or even bad, but there is this sense that I'm exploring a photo of a place that was taken a long time ago versus actually exploring that place. And that works. I would love to tell you this was clearly all intentional. Well, I guess in the flashback scene we have towards the end of Syberia 2, it certainly is intentional, and the old sepia filter gives us the impression of walking through some very old photo album. But for the rest of the game, it could just as easily have been a happy accident. As I said, the world we're exploring is old. Almost everything that is metal, even the magnificent train, which we know was only recently put together, has rust. Everywhere also feels abandoned and forgotten about. In Valladolid we discover everything is closed because of the funeral, but I can't imagine this place is any more bustling on a Saturday afternoon. Barakstadt, on the other hand, feels completely sterile almost, and eerily quiet for a place that is supposed to be filled with young minds that are eager to learn and carry that knowledge into the future, where they'll hopefully expand on it and pass it along to the next generation. I almost feel like Kate Walker should be whispering through these conversations that she has, lest she waken these mammoth skeletons. Komkolsgrad and Arrelbad are places that were important during the old Soviet Union. Komkolsgrad was a mine that became automated by Hans's automatons, and also had a branch of the Russian space program attached to it. That is until Hans up and ran off to continue his own adventures, and the government shut down the whole thing. Arrelbad is literally that washed up resort I was talking about earlier. It's a place that in its heyday played host to the most important people in the old Soviet Union, and going there was considered a great privilege. People could arrive by train or magnificent clockwork airship. But the resort is something forgotten now. Its beach is littered with the corpses of fishing boats. There are almost no guests there, and only a single staff member who can apparently spend most of his time watching football operates the whole thing. Even the old furniture and cocktail mixer seem to be lamenting the loss of the grandeur and prestige this place once had. In Arrelbad we meet Helena Romansky, a one-time opera singer of great fame. Just like the resort though, Helena's days of being young, important and adored by thousands are long past her. She is now just a sweet old lady who feels like she has lost something precious to her. And while she is well cared for by her own version of Oscar, who's named James, who is just as picky about the air quality for his wheel work as our own engineer, she is simply waiting to die. She doesn't seem entirely lonely or depressed, and she's living out the last of her life in a place she has fond memories of. But until Kate Walker comes along, there is a very strong sense that this woman has decided it's time to give up. The young vibrant opera star may be no more, but at least she has her memories. Syberia 2 has a similar but somewhat different vibe. Romansburg isn't exactly a forgotten place. In fact, this place seems to be far more alive than anywhere else we've visited so far. We can see people working outside, and there's even a friendly tavern, just what every adventurer needs to pick up quests and side gigs. But I think with Syberia 2, there is much more of a sense of isolation. Kate Walker, Hans and Oscar are now really far from civilization. Romansburg is the last stop on the track until they reach their final destination. I think the pre-rendered backgrounds and character models are much better in this game. There are little touches like the falling snow that help a lot to set Kate Walker and the other characters into the scene. No doubt some work was done on the engine in between games, and PC technology has always moved pretty fast, meaning developers can afford to push the envelope a little harder in terms of minimum requirements in the space of a couple of years. In terms of location though, the standout here is absolutely the Ucol village. It's explained at various points throughout both games that the Ucols had a very symbiotic relationship with their mammoth herds. Mammoth bone, ivory and skin were their major building materials, and were used for their homes, clothes and tools. The reason the Ucols settled in northern Syberia was to harvest the carcasses of the many dead mammoths preserved in the ice, and they were, at least for a while, receiving steady supplies from the Ark, which would return unmanned with tusks and hides for the tribe. This isolation meant that their way of life basically hasn't changed for tens of thousands of years. More or less anyway. My guess is this water wheel contraption is a Hans Vorarlberg special, and they've also constructed an extension to the train track as well to allow the clockwork train to be pulled all the way into their cavern beneath the ice. The whole place is dripping with the oniric, not quite real feeling that has punctuated so much of the game. It's fantasy for sure, but feels just real enough to leave you asking, what if? We live in a world that is surrounded by satellites, where air travel allows us to take off and land anywhere in the world in under a day. Take that, Mr. Fogg. Still love this story. And though it may seem that our world has no more mysteries, at least mysteries of this nature to give up, stories and worlds like this lead one to stare down a random side trail on a hike and ask yourself, I wonder where it leads. I've covered a few point-and-click adventures before, and honestly, I wonder just how much there really is left to say about them. It's not that Syberia is exactly the same as, say, The Longest Journey or Grim Fandango, but it's not wildly different from those games on a mechanical level either. I suppose the quality of the puzzles is really what makes or breaks these games. Are they intuitive, or do they require an absurd amount of pixel hunting and trial and error to get through? Do you feel like you're unraveling the mystery of the areas you're in and overcoming barriers to progress through the story, or are you just beating your head against a brick wall until something gives? And when you do get stumped for a long time or finally find yourself reaching for a guide, do you feel like it was your fault all along and you've learned how to play the game better? Or is it just some bullshit the devs did to artificially inflate what should have been a simple challenge for you to overcome? And in Syberia's case, the answer is yes. This part of the review is probably going to get a little into the negative, as for all its charm and the wonderful story it crafts, Syberia's puzzles definitely have some of the problems that eventually led to the decline of these old school narrative adventure games. None of these puzzles are outright batshit insane moon logic, but they definitely veer more into the realm of frustration. Narrative adventure games live and die on two things: inventory and sometimes environmental puzzles, and dialogue trees. Inventory puzzles are the type where you have to bring a key in your inventory to a lock so you can progress through it. This could be a literal key that you bring to a literal door or gate, like those found in Resident Evil, And yes, that game counts because survival horror is a tangent of the narrative adventure game. Or the lot could be skeleton pigeons guarding their eggs, and the key could be a balloon animal shaped like Robert Frost and a loaf of bread. And then of course there's this fucking abomination. A monstrosity that has done permanent damage to both myself and many another traveller in the land of Stark. And should there actually be a hell at the end of all this, I will make a point of being there to personally oversee the torment of everyone involved in its creation. I'm not overreacting, you are. The point is that under the hood, in the world of code, it all works the same. Bring item with tag A to obstruction with tag A, which will then play animation A and remove collider A. Simples. Anyway, let's talk about talking. I have a lot of mixed feelings about dialogue trees, but I think Syberia actually has a good way of dealing with them that gets even better in the second game too. I don't really see the point of dividing up your conversations into topics when your player is just going to click through them all anyway. It seems like you're only creating the illusion of control. Still, I've read counterpoint comments in some of my other videos saying it's preferable to just watching an entire conversation in one sitting, similar to something like a Metal Gear codec call. And I can totally agree with that. Games are an interactive medium after all, and as much as I enjoy the performances of David Hayter and co, I also find myself looking at my watch and wondering when the hell they're going to wrap this up so I can get back to actually playing this game. Also, if you think about it, most of the control we have in a game, especially one like this, well, it's very limited anyway. We may on occasion be able to solve branching puzzles in a different sequence, but we always have to solve all of these puzzles in order to advance to the next part of the story, and we are on rails the entire time. I still wonder if there is a more elegant solution to this problem though. Whenever Kate Walker talks to someone, she has a list of topics to go through. These range from something as general as her self-introduction.
The name is Kate Walker. My name is Kate. Kate Walker. My name is Kate Walker. Kate Walker. My name is Kate Walker. Kate Walker.
Bond. James Bond.
To very specific things like asking about the local wildlife. You might find useful information in some of these, but usually the options for mission and help are going to yield the responses you need to progress the story. Where the second game has a leg up on the first is that topics actually vanish after they've been exhausted, meaning you won't be able to repeat dialogue, or when you are stuck on a puzzle, you'll know if a character has nothing of value to contribute to your predicament. In both games you may need to click on a topic more than once to get the actual speech that you need to continue the story, so this is a nice touch. Also, on occasion, topics will reappear in the notebook when talking to certain people, but that just indicates that they now have something new to say on the subject, and that it's probably useful for solving your problem. So this is a fairly elegant way of handling dialogue trees. I never felt like I was slogging through topics just on the off chance I missed something, so overall, there weren't any problems here. The puzzles on the other hand, well, that's where I have issues. Like, a lot of issues. The first thing I'll say is if you just want to enjoy the story, then I'll suggest up front you either just follow a guide or watch a let's play. Ideally one with no commentary so you can get the full force of the narrative. Myself, I went as hard as I was willing into cracking the puzzles on my own, and only resorted to checking a guide when I'd explored the play area multiple times, talked to every character about every topic, and done my damnedest to comb the screens for interactable locations and pickups. That last part right there should be a big clue as to what caused a lot of my problems when playing these games. Yep, the dreaded pixel hunting is here, and it was a huge reason for most of my headaches. Not only is it quite easy to miss triggers and colliders for interactable objects, but you can also miss out on scene transitions if you aren't carefully exploring all of the borders of the play area. I understand that this is something that was part of most classic point-and-click adventure games, but I think we can all agree it wasn't actually good. In most situations where I consulted a guide, I realized that I was on the right track and looking for the right thing, but had failed on what boiled down to a technicality. It's something that could easily have been fixed with a button to highlight selectable areas, like what most classic CRPGs have, or the Resident Evil method of using actual 3D models for interactables and pickups because of how much they stand out against the backgrounds. I'm not asking these games to go all out yellow paint, but something subtle like Manny Calavera's head swing, or a slight change in the hue or saturation of interactable items and locations would go a long way to solving this problem. Unfortunately though, pixel hunting seems much more like a feature than a bug in these games. I'm not entirely sure where to lay the blame here. On one hand, Syberia was made by a very small team, so it's not like they had an infinite supply of fresh playtesters to expose their puzzles to every time they updated their build. So who can really say how this looked from the developer point of view? But it sure does seem like they thought they were adding real challenge to this game by making transitions and items obscure and difficult to find. Let's head to the University of Barkstad for our first example. There's one of Hans and Anna's music box cylinders here at the university, and Oscar isn't going to let you drive off over the Russian border without you getting it. The only thing is, you haven't had any reason to think one of these things is here at all. It's actually located in this cupboard here, which again you have no incentive to explore or even give a second glance at, unless you by chance happen to move your cursor over it and see the transition marker appear. Or how about we jump towards the end of the second game and take a look at this train control panel. So I can see levers and switches and things that are obvious to use, but this is where the key goes to switch it on. What even is this? To me, this is the equivalent of a game with a lot of traversal, having a section where you have to walk or balance on a narrow ledge, and rather than keeping the camera behind you where it would actually be useful, it swings to some weird angle and disables your ability to reset the camera to artificially inflate the difficulty. It's not adding challenge, just frustration, and it could even be considered time wasting. I could easily bring up a dozen examples from both games, but I think I've made my point clear. There is one very specific puzzle that needs to be addressed for different reasons. In the Romansburg Monastery, it's actually possible to softlock yourself out of progressing the game any further. You're supposed to open this panel here, place this lens into the hole, and then play with the flaps until... Wow, now I'm typing this out, it sounds really bad, doesn't it? So we're making the hole bigger and smaller. Go on, get all the laughs out. Basically though, if you start the second part without inserting the first part, the hole will shrink up, and you'll never actually be able to get it completely open again, and it just keeps getting worse. This is something of a well-known bug in the game, but it's a fairly big derp on behalf of the team. The instruction manual only credits 3 people as testers though, so while I'm sure these guys knew their stuff when it came to tracking actual bugs, if none of them had messed up the first time they tried this puzzle, it's fair to say they might never have seen this one. So now we have to move on to something a little more complicated to tackle. That being motivation and direction. I think the simplest way I can describe this is, you want your players to have some kind of idea of what they are trying to do before they start trying to do it. For example, you want them to be going somewhere and to run into a locked door before they find a key. This way they understand that they need to find a key and can set about exploring with the intention of specifically doing that and have that eureka moment when they find it. Resident Evil 1 does this with great mastery, and its Creepy Mansion setting goes a long way towards helping with that. You'll come up against locked doors very early on, so even though you may not find the specific key needed for the door you ran into, you understand that there are locked doors and you should keep tabs on where you come across keys or move them to a storage box as quickly as you can. Likewise, heading left from the mansion entrance will have you stumble into puzzle locks here, but find interesting items for puzzle locks on the other side of the mansion, and vice versa. Meaning there is a good mix of finding a puzzle lock first, and then later stumbling into the key and getting that big dopamine kick as you rush to ferry it back to the puzzle, and also finding a lock and realizing you now know exactly what that random thing you saw in that room way over on the other side of the mansion, or that has been sitting in your chest for hours, is needed for now. The point is, you always know your goal, and you are always moving with intention towards it. In the opening scene in Syberia, we have an encounter between Kate, the hotel owner, and Momo. That ends with Momo storming out and dropping cogs all over the floor. We can pick these cogs up, and even take a look at this little carving of the shape they're supposed to go in, long before we have any reason to think we even have clockwork contraptions to fix. This is a very minor immersion break, and nothing super bad. After all, I've played these kinds of games before, so I can just say, hey, Kate is a nice girl who's just cleaning up, and maybe planning to return these to Momo later. But this becomes something of a bigger problem down the line. On one hand, I applaud that we're given so much freedom to explore the play areas in this game, but on the other, it can be very easy to break what feels like the intended order of encountering and solving puzzles, and just kind of feel like you're flying blind, and doing stuff because this is an adventure game and solving puzzles is how we get to the next section of the story. In Valladolid, it can be very easy to rush off and wind up going down the path that leads to finding the mammoth doll, long before you have any idea what the hell you're supposed to be doing with it. It's probably this puzzle with the train near the end of the second game that made this something I wanted to bring up though. In the Sokal village, we are given instructions to prepare the way for the trip to Syberia, but the only item we have to tackle this now is the key to the train. The train that is very much at the end of the line. So we're given a bunch of levers and dials to pull and twist without really knowing why we're doing any of it. The actual point is to use the train as a massive heat gun to melt the ice surrounding this ship, meaning you need to stock up on coal for fire and water for steam. This is probably one of those times when the pre-rendered backgrounds were actually to the game's detriment. I know, right? Someone take my pre-rendered background fan club card from me. But had I just been able to swing the camera and get some idea of the train's location relative to this big block of ice, or maybe being able to see more of this frozen ice and get a better idea of what it is and that there's something inside there, I feel like this would have all made a lot more sense and felt more intuitive. As it stood, I felt like I was just randomly pulling levers until something happened, and then when I got the cutscene I was like, oh, so that's what I was doing. And I feel like that isn't the desired response to a puzzle like this. Okay, I think that's enough negatives. I'm going to have you thinking I don't like this game at this rate. Think of me as that friend who's always complaining about his girlfriend. You might think our relationship is terrible and, well, in some cases you'd definitely be right. But in this case, it's just that when everything is great, I don't need to say anything more than, yeah, things are good. And I may not want to share the more intimate moments of my relationship with my friends like that. But when things are bad and I need to vent, my bros are the ones I go to. I think the thing I like most about Syberia's puzzles are the various books we can find around the world that help us along the way. Not least of all because we get some of Benoit Sokal's wonderful art in them, but because they reward paying careful attention to them. There are more obvious examples like the botany book in the Barokstadt University. Once you have this book, you can start asking for the grapes you need to attract the Amazon birds. However, if you take the time to read through Brother Alexei's notes from the frozen north at the start of the second game, you're going to get hints about these little lemming guys that will be used in a puzzle much later in the game, as well as learn about the Yukis and how they are eternally led by their stomachs. And hey, that sure does look like Oscar there, huh? What's that exactly? Ooh, the Soul Messenger. I bet the Ukals would think he's kinda scary if they saw him. I love stuff like this because it rewards your curiosity and makes you want to pay attention and look things over carefully. And there is just as much of that as there is the stuff I was complaining about earlier. So let's call it a 50-50 on the puzzles. I know that 5 out of 10 is considered a bad score these days, but think of it as, yes, there are problems, but there's also great stuff, and they kind of balance each other overall. Syberia 2's adventure is just as wild as the first game's, if a lot snowier. Chasing down the train, Kate Walker finds herself getting trapped in a hunting lodge by a bear, swinging across a precipice like she's Indiana Jones, and... you know what, I'm calling bullshit on this one. Maybe if I could see the rock face in actual 3D, I might be convinced it's a very low level climb, but the level of skill needed for something like that isn't something you can just pull out of your inside jacket pocket. We also get a brief reunion with our aspiring space pilot from the first game, and see that the mission we sent him away on back then, well, I mean, it mostly succeeded, just not so much the landing part. And if Yuki-powered train cars, deadly rope swings, and death-defying wall climbs still aren't James Bond enough for you, how's this? I love this game. It is completely bonkers. Syberia 2, however, doesn't pull any punches at the end. The wacky adventures of Hans, Kate, and Oscar get very real very quickly when we finally arrive at the Sokal village. Hans' ordeal with Igor and Ivan leaves him almost at death's door, and even the Sokal shaman is ready to simply ease his passage into the next life. So Kate Walker must enter into a dream trance and try to coax him back into consciousness, so he can finish his final voyage. It's here we get a peek into the young boy's unfortunate upbringing. We know from Anna's diary that Hans was locked in the attic of his house for extended periods of time, even missing his own 18th birthday because his father wanted him to abandon his interest in mammoths and focus his talents on things that would help the company. We also have to solve one of the game's most infuriating puzzles in the form of this grandfather clock, which, as far as I can tell, presumes we all have pre-existing knowledge of how these things work. Don't feel bad about checking a guide to solve this one. It's needlessly complex and unintuitive. You're basically going to have to do a bunch of trial and error to figure it out, and the last time I checked, that was one of the things we wanted to avoid in these kinds of games. Anyway, we find young Hans in his attic working on something that will help him one day. A truly ingenious automaton heart called Oscar. And he tells us that opening Oscar's heart will bring him back. And when I approached Oscar about this, oh god, my heart broke when he said this.
Kate Walker, I am really very pleased to have met you.
Oscar's ultimate purpose, or at least the purpose of the body he's encased in, is actually a kind of mobility suit or exoskeleton to keep our boy Hans moving just a little longer. And with that gut-wrenching scene out of the way, all our tears dried up, a heavy drinking session, a hangover the next day, and finally getting back to the game, we used the train to thaw the Uccle arc, which carries us to our final destination. We have only a couple more puzzles to crack before we finish the game, but everything we need should be at our fingertips now. Though again, there's still some pixel hunting involved, and I can't imagine anyone at this stage is really in the mood for having the narrative grind to a screeching halt because of that. But whatever, I've done enough complaining about pixel hunting already. But on the impossible island of blue grass, somewhere beyond the snow and ice of the Arctic Ring, we sound an ancient Uccle horn, and we wait as the rain begins to pour down. And just when it seems like this was truly a fool's errand, Syberia 1 and 2 were both critical and commercial successes. In the modern AAA landscape where games are expected to sell multiple millions of copies in their first few months, sales in the hundreds of thousands, spread out over a few years, might not seem like a big deal at all. But these were games made by small teams with small budgets, and I doubt they were as heavily marketed as your average Ubislog or Electronic Atrocity. The games found their audience, and they made their money. More importantly though, Syberia became something of a cult classic. A niche game for a niche audience that punched way above its weight class. People loved the story and the characters, and have wonderful memories of playing. Memories I'm hoping a few of you will share in the comments with me down below. It stands shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Tim Schafer's classic LucasArts games. As I said at the start of the video, there's no doubt that Benoit Sokal's artistic vision is the biggest reason for this. He painted a beautiful world, and took us on a whimsical dreamlike adventure through it, broke our hearts along the way, and at the very end we watched Hans Vorarlberg finally achieve his childhood dream and take his last ride on the back of a mammoth. And Kate Walker, well, just like Dr. Sam Beckett. There are certain genres that I can just name and you will instantly know if it's not for you. Point and click adventure is definitely one of them. Modern narrative adventure games, those that are influenced by the likes of Life is Strange and the David Cage-like, I think have broader appeal, and it will be more of the contents of the game that will be the deal breaker. So if point-and-click adventures is a massive turn-off for you, well, this probably isn't going to be the series that changes your mind. If you are just interested in the story though, you could play through the games with a guide as I've suggested before. But there's also the Syberia comic that tells a slightly different version of the story, more from the perspective of Hans from what I understand. For everyone else though, I guess if you are a point-and-click adventure fan, then you've already played this. You already know how amazing it is, and you don't need me to tell you that. But if like me, this one did pass you by, and has been sitting on your to-play list for a long time, don't wait any longer. Seriously. Install this game, jump on a wondrous clockwork train, and go take the adventure of a lifetime. "13 years have passed since we left Kate Walker standing on the island of Syberia. Hans Vorarlberg had completed his lifelong journey in more ways than one. While the sick old man finally got to take a ride on the back of a mammoth, we knew all too well at that point that his health was declining rapidly, and even if he'd wanted to, there was no coming back for him. The ending was everything we'd worked for, and there didn't need to be any more. Even so, 13 years later in 2017, we finally got Syberia 3. God damn, 2017. That was my 3rd year in Japan. I still had my dinky little box apartment that got filled with cockroaches in the summer, and was still working in my first job here. It feels really strange that that's almost a quarter of my life ago now. Anyway, what were we talking about? Prey 2017. Okay, great. Wait, no, Syberia 3, right? The game itself wasn't all that well received, and I can fully understand why people felt this wasn't just a disappointment for the series, but also just not a very fun game to play at all. However, rather than the series ending with a whimper instead of a bang, Microids and Benoit Sokal took the feedback to heart and got back into Unity and got cooking. The output of that extended development cycle was Syberia The World Before, a game that very much feels like a post-Life is Strange narrative adventure game that delivered hard on the story and visuals and went in an interesting direction with the series' trademark puzzles. I have to tell you guys, I'd originally written Remember Me in the script instead of Life is Strange. You know, that Don't Nod Capcom cyberpunk parkour game about changing people's memories? So underrated. I really need to cover that on here one day. While none of the Syberia games have been AAA affairs that had all the money to back them up, they've always been ambitious and sought to grow beyond their limitations to deliver powerful and emotional narratives. And that is something that was definitely back in The World Before. I really can't wait to start telling you all about it. I had more than one comment in my first video from fans who had absolutely no idea it had even happened, which leaves me wondering if Microids needs to up their marketing game a little. Sadly though, Benoit Sokal passed away before the release of the last entry in the Kate Walker saga, but I think he would have been very happy with the output, and I think just about everyone who played it felt it was a phenomenal return to form for the series. It would be hard to recapture the magic of those first 2 games, even if we imposed the same limitations on ourselves that those studios had to work with at the time. Nostalgia is definitely part of it because, let's be honest, those pixel hunting puzzles were kind of ass. But it was the total package that brought the magic to the game. I wonder, if someone were to recreate the game in Unreal Engine today, if it would be more fun or less. Even so, this game is probably about as close as modern developers will get to achieving the magic of those first 2. And if one day I have to eat those words, I assure you, I will be more than happy to. But before we talk about why that is, well, we've got to deal with something a little less fun. And that is Syberia 3. Syberia 1 and 2 released a matter of a couple of years apart, and are basically one game cut in half. Had the first game not sold well enough to warrant financing a sequel, the ending that saw Kate Walker finally cast away her life in New York City and fully embrace that of wild adventure in a dreamlike world would have been good enough. While Hans' journey to see the mammoths would have been left unresolved, it's very clear that this physical journey is playing second fiddle to the journey of self-discovery that Kate Walker is undertaking. Still, we got our part 2, and the entire narrative was wrapped up in a satisfying way. We can assume that after taking Hans to see the mammoths, Kate Walker somehow returned to the Yukol village and was maybe able to ride the train back to Romansburg to whatever her next adventure might be. Private Detective Nick Canton had also declared that he was giving up on the hunt for our runaway lawyer, and a future of infinite possibilities was laid out for our heroine to explore. While Benoit Sokal remained in the world of video games, he decided to explore other stories and other worlds for a while. In 2003, he co-founded Whitebird Studios, which put out a couple of point-and-click adventures that received overall middling review scores. The studio was closed in 2010 due to financial difficulties that stemmed from an unpaid-for, cancelled project. Still, he had never given up on the idea of returning to the world he created back when he made Amazon, and he certainly thought that Kate Walker had a few more adventures left to take us all on. According to this interview on the Microids YouTube channel, it was when he saw his son play Assassin's Creed that he started to think the world of gaming had caught up with his vision of what he wanted to create. Syberia 1 and 2 were both low-budget early 2000s games, and while within the confines of what was possible with the available resources, they created a beautiful world and told a rich and wonderful story, Benoit wanted to do more. Documentation on Syberia 3 is somewhat limited, and I'd really like to know more about what happened with this development. The Wikipedia article mentions the game was originally announced in 2009, with an original release date of sometime in 2010. This, of course, didn't happen, and there were a lot of changes going on in the background, with Microids being acquired by another parent company, and money for the game's development not being released. Things apparently weren't ironed out until 2014, and the game itself didn't drop until 2017. This feels like something of a development hell story. It seems like they announced the project prematurely, and then just got stuck in contract negotiations and boring corporate red tape for a long time, and a lot of people were sitting around twiddling their thumbs and wondering when they'll actually be able to start working. Since there isn't a great deal of information on the internet about this, I'd rather not speculate or lay blame on anything in particular, but this isn't exactly the first story of this kind that we've heard, is it? If I had to sum up Syberia 3 in one word, that word would be rough. If you gave me a few words, I'd say ambitious and rough. The game is, well, it's kind of a mess. How much of a mess, you say? Enough for me to not want to replay the whole game for capture, and try to figure out a way to keep this part as brief as possible, while also highlighting the important beats that went on to turn the next game into such a triumph. Here's hoping I succeed. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Syberia 3's story sees Kate Walker return from the titular island and become reunited with the Yukol tribe. These guys have been somewhat retconned from a group of people living permanently in the northern reaches of Syberia and clinging to a way of life that hasn't changed since the time of the mammoths, to a semi-nomadic tribe that eventually replaced their codependency on mammoths with snow ostriches. I checked, they're not real. They're another creation of Benoit and his writing team, and unique to this strange world that exists only a small sidestep from our own. This is okay. We only spent a very brief time with the Yukols in the second game, and there was no reason for the people who were lecturing us, in one case quite literally, on their culture to bring up anything about their modern existence. So maybe all the snow ostriches were just in another cave around the time of our last visit. In our opening cutscene, we see that the Yukols found Kate Walker freezing and delirious from her attempt to return from the mythical island of the last mammoths. Their beliefs are that the spirits guided them to her, and they did everything in their power to keep her alive before transferring her to a clinic in the town of Valsambor that exists somewhere. Similar to Borokstadt University and other colourful locations we encountered in the first games, it's not a real place, more an idea of a place that people can kind of guess where it is based on architecture, fashion, culture, etc. These kinds of locations are going to be a big deal in the next game, so I thought it was worth bringing up here. We also get this ominous scene where the, doctor at the clinic is communicating with some kind of Russian big boss guy. The way they're talking implies they know something about Kate Walker that she doesn't, and that it would be in everyone's best interest if she was detained indefinitely. I call this scene ominous because, while it implies some darker plot that we're going to have to contend with, it's also just bad. I'll dissect the cliché character design and the bad voice acting later, but this whole thing just made me cringe and was the first sign that the game wasn't going to live up to the last two by a long way. After getting some good old-fashioned Western medicine in her system, Kate Walker awakens, apparently prematurely, in a bed in this somewhat shabby-looking clinic in a room that she shares with a young Yukol man. This is Kirk, and he's both here to act as our tutorial guy and exposition guy. He brings Kate Walker up to speed on how the Yukols are undertaking a rare pilgrimage to the breeding grounds of their ostrich herds. This is an event that takes place around every 20 to 30 years or so, and is something of a big deal for everyone and everything involved. Since the Yukols now depend on the ostriches in the same way they did the mammoths, when the big birds want to get up and go get jiggy, the entire clan has to pack up and go with them. Unfortunately, soldiers from the local regime, what kind of regime isn't specified but inferred from our probable geographic location, bombed roads because
they think that the snow ostrich migration has no place in today's world, and that my tribe should settle down once and for all.
Which is fairly weak-ass motivation if I'm being honest. But hey, it's the start of the game. We don't know exactly what our enemies' motivations are, or what it is they know about Kate Walker, or it's a nothing burger, guys. Yeah, this whole plot thread goes absolutely nowhere, and not only doesn't add anything special to the story, it proactively subtracts from it by highlighting just how bad the writing is this time. They also clearly realize just how bad they fucked this one up because the whole arc gets abandoned as quickly as possible in the next game, in a way that leaves you asking even more questions than you had before. That being said, you're so happy it's over and done with, you just move on. Yeah, this is actually why I didn't want to talk too much about this game. It doesn't take too long for the bile to come out. You know what? Fuck it. So, Planescape Torment is a 1999 CRPG made in the Infinity engine.
Not funny. Not even a little bit.
Okay, come on, let's get this done. So Kirk is the guide for the current migration, as chosen by the spirits, but he's unable to do his job until he gets a prosthetic leg that's apparently being made by a local master craftsman. He's also being restrained in what looks like some kind of elaborate pain chair that shoots sedatives into his system at regular intervals. Where do I get me one of these? So since she's up and about, we get a small tutorial puzzle to help Kate Walker get out of the room, and that's where things get weird. An event in the recent history of Valsimbor was a nuclear meltdown that took place in a reactor in a place called Baranor. This is another town located on the other side of the lake that had an entire amusement park attached to it. The event created an exclusion zone filled with all kinds of mutants and weird anomalies where the laws of physics just break down. Wait, sorry, wrong game. But you can see the comparison with Chernobyl, right? You can see a lot of patients who have what look like tumors and radiation burns, and there's more than a little psychological trauma going around in this ward. Still, when treatment looks like this... polygraphs. More pseudoscience bullshit. You can't blame the patients if their recovery is a little stunted. So yeah, between creepy doctors and less than conventional treatment methods, this is starting to feel more like one of those horror movies where someone thinks they've been wrongfully admitted into a mental health clinic and doesn't know if they're actually being paranoid or if the staff really are out to get them. Still, when we are given a key for the elevator and told that all we have to do is solve its puzzle to use it, and that key turns out to be missing an important component and will never work no matter what we do, well, the paranoia starts to feel real. Thanks to a very clever owl and Yukol craftsmanship though, we are able to escape the upper floors, only to discover that the funicular, one of these things, that should ship us quickly down to the town, has been shut down, and we overhear orderlies saying that they may have to deal with a very disturbing new patient. We do get to meet Dr. Zamiatin. This guy is actually the head of this clinic and seems like a straight up guy who's just got his head buried in the sand regarding Olga Efimova. Well, I guess she must be doing something to actually help her patients sometimes, right? Now this clinic is actually built into an old fort that's riddled with secret passages, which is actually how we make our underground escape, but not before we find Dr. Olga Efimova and her fiendish sidekick pouring diesel into the water to contaminate the absolutely massive river. So I guess they've got an entire shipping freight's worth stashed in their basement. And poison the ostriches. Oh, and we also get a video call from Nick Canton. We last heard of this guy in Syberia 2, when he wound up trapped in a hunter's lodge 1,000 miles from anywhere with a hungry grizzly bear stalking around outside. While he decided to cry uncle at that moment, he's not only back on Kate Walker's trail, but this is no longer a simple rescue mission anymore.
The feds are looking for me? But what's the charge? I've done nothing wrong.
Embezzlement! Apparently you took off with a contract for the sale of the clockwork toy factory in Vorarlberg.
Too bad she can't just post that contract back to Mr. Marsden. These people only care about the money. So we use this dam to filter the water and go visit the Yukol shaman for a long time no see beer. It's here we basically get our first list of objectives. We've got to get Kirk's prosthesis to him somehow, and then think of some way to cross the lake to Barinor, the place where the nuclear meltdown happened. Normally, the migration just walks across the frozen lake, but due to climate change, the lake hasn't frozen this year, and there may or may not be an actual kraken in the lake too. Wait, is there? Ah, yes there is. But there's also the much more devilish problem of paperwork and red tape before we can even leave the camp and go on the adventure. So our primary stakes are established. Kate Walker, feeling indebted to the Yukols, and while dodging a private detective and an eye-patched reject from one of the bad Indiana Jones movies, is going to try and help them navigate a world of corrupt politicians and medical professionals, something they blissfully have very little experience with, and barter passage on a ship so they can continue their great pilgrimage and protect their way of life from the powerful forces that would rather they just settle down and start paying taxes or something. It's not a bad hook. It lacks some of the childlike wonder that the first two games had, but we're already getting sucked into Sokal's strange alternative Earth, and some of those early puzzles showed a lot of promise. Unfortunately, it is more or less all downhill from here, guys. Not entirely. There is one really interesting character, and we do become reunited with Oscar, but this game, it's a slog. Our problems arise once we get control of Kate Walker in the clinic and realise that the controls are not very responsive. Collision boxes seem to be several times too big, and I have no idea what's going on with these choppy animations. I don't know if it's a frame rate issue or what, but there's nothing particularly smooth about the way we move around our environments. One area that really throws all this into sharp focus is a later section where we're dealing with an emergency on a ship. We need to smash a bunch of lights all over the deck, and Kate Walker is just jogging awkwardly around the place and going through tediously slow animations to climb onto boxes. Like, this is a woman who, in the last game, free climbed a lethal rock face, struggling to get onto a box. Also, stairs in this game are a massive pain. Just getting close to them will initiate the slow walk upstairs animation, whether you were planning to go up the things or not. Oh, and they really should have used classic tank controls here, because every time there's a tracking shot in this game, you wind up moving way off course because of it. So just getting around is a mild irritation that is going to build up throughout the entire game. Syberia 3 has point and click controls, but this really feels like a legacy feature kept in to keep the long-term fans happy, and not the preferred method of play. On my first playthrough, I went through a good chunk of the opening chapter with point and click controls, before getting frustrated and just switching to a controller. This way, you'll get lots of contextual button prompts to help you navigate through the game's systems and puzzles. However, rotating objects in your inventory will go up to warp speed. I'm low-key wondering if there's some frame rate issue, similar to what we had with Syberia 2 at work here. But there are almost zero graphical settings that you can play with to try and fix any of these problems. So, I guess we just gotta live with it? Now, our environments are once again the highlight of the show. While technology had progressed and the size of the team that worked on Syberia 3 was likely considerably bigger than the one that built the first two games, this was no doubt a AA game that was looking to recapture some of the original's magic that led to it punching way above its weight class. The game was built in the Unity engine, and 2017 was firmly in the 8th generation of consoles. So our environments have gone from these gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds to full 3D locations rocking normal maps and full PBR materials to help create a more realistic looking world. Still, it's very clear that the artists, especially the character artists, weren't going for an ultra-realistic look in this game, and were looking to tell just as much of a story with their visuals as they were anything else. Valsenborg, similar to other locations we've visited in previous games, has this trapped in the past kind of vibe to it. The old European architecture and overcast weather that makes me think of the country I grew up in all create something of a dreary vibe. One touch that I really like are the piles of snow that are stacked up around the streets. In Syberia 2 we got lush, perfectly white snow that created a winter wonderland. Here, the snow is just an annoyance to the locals who have to move it out of their streets so that they can get on with their lives. It's dirty and compacted and just shoved to one side. Aside from the clinic, there are only two other locations we visit in this area though. The first being a nice old-timey pub, and the second being Mr. Steiner's workshop. The workshop inspires wonderful nostalgia for the first couple of games, for obvious reasons. And it's no surprise at all to discover that Mr. Steiner is familiar with both the works and person of Hans Vorarlberg. My point is, this is all very charming. The Uccle camp feels very warm and cozy, and provides a sense of safety, especially Kate's personal yurt. I gotta get me one of these too. The town has a similar vibe to many of the places we've already visited, and this is the part they absolutely nailed. Baranor is likewise interesting and creepy in equal measure, both the abandoned amusement park and the parts of the town itself that we actually get to see. So the environment art is mostly a win, and might be one of the biggest reasons to not skip this game if you really don't want to. The big difference here is that, while all the locations in these games have had this old forgotten vibe, the third game's locations are less wondrous and more creepy. And I think that's where some of the magic is lost. The character models and textures are fine overall. Kate Walker has honestly never looked better, and voice actress Sharon Mann makes a much welcome return as the New York lawyer turned nomad in this game. However, it's when they start to talk that the problems arrive. All of these characters are suffering from severe facial paralysis, and it's a problem that's made even more prominent by the close-up camera angles that are used during the conversations. Because of the technological limitations of the first two games, most conversations took place using only a couple of pulled-out camera angles. After all, were they to get too up close and personal, we'd notice very quickly how low poly these models were and how low resolution these textures are. Since texture maps could be anything from 1 to 2K at this point, and each character would have multiple textures, it's possible to bring the camera in close and show off the good work. Unfortunately, the mouth movement is on a level with Shenmue, and as a 3D artist myself, I can practically see the topology of the mouth stretching and contracting. This is also because the lip syncing is really bad. Microids are a French-based publisher, and the first two games were developed in a Montreal studio, so my guess is this was all done in French first and localized later, but for whatever reason, money I'm guessing, the lip files weren't updated to match the different languages. Another thing to note here is that if you read the subtitles, you'll find massive discrepancies there too. So maybe the cast were just jazzing their lines a little, and no one was paid enough to add those updates in. Also, while Kate Walker and especially this guy Captain Oboe are absolutely knocking it out of the park with their performances, the vast majority of the cast are not pulling their weight on this one. And there's a huge writing issue here too, with characters doing massive awkward exposition dumps, and then another character reiterating the same thing, like, listen to this super smooth insertion of information that might be useful for later.
Grandfather, I know you're still really angry with Captain Oboe because he abandoned the automatons that you built with your friend Hans and Baranor. He was supposed to wait for them. They were going to take all the survivors they found in the rubble to the boat and then bring everyone here to safety in Valsambor. But in the end, when he got to the beach at Baranor and saw the disaster and all the dead, he became really afraid. The disease, the radiation. He must have had an uncontrollable panic attack, so he immediately turned back, dumped the machines on the crystal into the lake, and came back empty-handed to Valsambor. And the automatons have been there ever since, in hell.
Yeah, it's not just those facial animations that make me think of my early adventures in Yokosuka, looking for sailors.
Saijo-san, do you know any places where sailors like to hang out around here?
So from a good point to a bad point, let's swing back around to a good point, and try to keep things balanced. I really like Syberia 3's puzzles. This particular evolution of the narrative adventure genre is a big positive. I think the puzzles in The World Before are even better though, so we'll dive into the how and why of it in more detail there. The gist of it is though, rather than puzzles being a simple matter of bring correct object to correct obstruction and use it to clear the path, now we have to actually go through a larger series of steps to use it. In Syberia 1, there was a great example of this when we needed to get some papers stamped so that Oscar would release the train to us, but the pre-rendered environments meant the level of interaction was pretty basic. Whether as an intentional callback or not, an early puzzle in Syberia 3 is also focused on getting a document stamped so we can be on our merry way. Pixel hunting is long gone at this point, and interactable areas are highlighted with simple UI elements. We still have to actually open our inventory and choose the correct item to use at this stage though. So, to get our paper stamped we first need to get the documents from one of the locals, get a copy of the stamp, which means asking a Uccle craftsman to make one, but he needs wax for the mold and a reference image. Then when we put it all together, we see that the ink sponge is dry, so we have to go find some ink somewhere. Yes, we use the ink from a dead squid. And finally, assemble all these pieces and actually operate the mechanism with various contextual button prompts to get things done. This sort of thing was introduced in various David Cage games before now, so I'd say they learnt the right lessons from those. I found these puzzles to be overall very satisfying. That doesn't mean there aren't a few bad ones. This roller coaster puzzle here, for example, requires you to figure out the exact position to place some metal rods to force the car to stop at the correct spot. But if you mess up, you're going to have to ride the roller coaster all the way to the end to find out. A total waste of time. Lastly, I'd say with the exception of the very last puzzle, which is this completely absurd Uccle smoke machine that we somehow have to turn on, none of them are especially challenging. Going back to the first two games, one of my complaints was about a lack of clear motivation to reach our goals. This seemed like the trade-off necessary to let the player feel like they're exploring and unlocking the mysteries of their environments and progressing the story. Well, now things have gone way too far in the other direction, with every single little objective being laid out for you step by step, and little to no chance for you to get ahead and feel like you got one up on the game. There are times when this makes perfect sense. An early series of challenges in Valsambor see you helping out to prepare a ship to take the Uccles across the lake. The captain tells you what you need to do, and you run out there and do it before coming back to get your next job. So in this situation, of course you aren't going to be taking care of the water tanks or putting on your diving suit when the only thing you've been asked to do is take care of the coal. But as the game progresses, it sort of starts to feel like you're really being taken for a ride here. Every time there is a small problem, it seems like Kate Walker is the only one who can save the day. This makes sense in Valsambor at least. Most Uccles come to this place maybe twice in their entire lives, so having a westernized lawyer around to help with cultural barriers seems like a good idea. But later in the game, I couldn't help but feel like I was just having my good nature taken advantage of. Worst of all, it makes the Uccles seem like helpless children. Sure, they're fish out of water in the concrete jungle, but this is a clan that lives and survives in one of the harshest environments on the planet, and built all of this. This is their pilgrimage, and while the world certainly has changed, I'd hope they could figure out how to wipe their own arses while on their most sacred of journeys, and not need me to hold their hand while they do it. There's a scene towards the end of the game, just before the final bridge, where our exhausted heroine is trying to sleep in her yurt, and then the procession grinds to a halt and she's like, "God damn, what is it now?" And I was right there with her. Like, can we just get this damn pilgrimage over with? So, points for trying for sure, but they definitely swung the needle too far in the opposite direction this time. It was the villains of the piece, and especially their involvement at the end, that really set me against this game. Had these two people not been in the game and this one been used correctly, things would be elevated from the level of something I begrudge having installed on my computer and replaying for capture, to a charming but flawed third entry that was okay but fell short of what came before it. Like, seriously guys, I am going through my first full playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 right now, and it was just such a drag firing this up to try and push a little further through an adventure that I wasn't invested in, while Astarion is trying to riz me left, right and centre, and the best steppy dommy mommy since Lady D is hanging out half naked in my camp. I honestly don't know how people play games or watch movies that they hate to make angry review content about them. Like, when you're on your death's bed looking back at how you spent your time, are you really gonna think this was the best thing you could have done with it? Each to their own, I guess. So, what is the crime of these would-be villains, you ask? Well, being the blandest, most 2D cardboard cutout stereotypes you could possibly imagine, and having absolutely zero motivation for their actions. Well, nothing that makes sense anyway. The area we're travelling through is ruled by some kind of regime that for some reason don't want the Uccles taking their sacred pilgrimage through their land, and certainly don't want an American lawyer turned adventurer helping them achieve this. Their entire motivation for this is they think the Uccles' way of life is kind of cringe, and they're a minor inconvenience to Valsambor for about 2 days every 20 to 30 years or so. In fact, they're taking this threat to the life and liberty of their people so seriously that they can easily spare like a whole helicopter and 3 guys with guns they never fire to take care of it. They also feel the need to fly this doctor around with them everywhere they go because, I don't know, maybe Captain Eyepatch has a thing for short-haired dominatrix types? I cannot wrap my head around what the fuck is going on with these people at all.
But Arkham,
I hear you say through flabbergasted lips.
Didn't you say regime? Isn't that just code for commie Nazis or something?
So skipping ahead to the 4th game, yes, these guys are the Sokal versus Nazis, and no, that still doesn't excuse their actions. Have you heard of Show Don't Tell? I mean, the New Order were like even more evil Nazis too, and they still went out of their way to make sure I understood what it was they wanted, and that I hated everything about them, especially Death's Head. We will have a reckoning, sir. God, Brian Bloom is so fucking good as BJ. Anyway, saying these guys are fascists, ergo they hate things, is the same as having a villain whose plan is batshit insane and impossible to follow, and saying, well, he's crazy, of course it'll be completely random. Ignoring all the way more interesting ways you could write a villain who has serious mental health problems, you have to be a damn good writer to pull that off. Your audience isn't going to become invested in characters or a story if they're just being fucked around at every turn, only to have the payoff being, well, of course it wasn't going to make any sense. I'm not saying it can't be done well, but it's very easy to do badly.
But what about the other villains in these games?
You continue to splutter.
Weren't they just two-dimensional characters too? Isn't that just par for the course for these games?
Those characters fitted the markedly different tone of those games. Sergei seemed almost self-aware of how absurd he was, while Ivan got under my skin with his slights and spiteful behavior. He likewise trashed my cozy little mobile home and nearly killed one of my friends in the process. These are relatable actions that would piss me off in the real world too, and I can understand people shitting on each other for the sake of a payday. But I don't even know what the politics of these guys are beyond eye patches and no sacred pilgrimages. Likewise, this game is just a bit darker, and seems to be trying to be a touch more mature.
But, Kate Walker, my clothes. I don't have any clothes.
I said a touch, so bland caricatures aren't going to cut it. Olga Efimova, who is always referred to by her full name in the most cringe way possible, could have been interesting if they were going to stretch out the hospital section further, and maybe have Kate uncover evidence of patient abuse or illegal testing, or anything that would have made sense. As far as I can tell though, she actually is treating most of the patients in the ward we wake up in, and just occasionally reports to, I don't even know this guy's name, to inform him of mysterious American travelers. Once we've escaped Valsambor though, I don't know what the hell she's doing here. Villains are supposed to challenge the hero. They're supposed to raise the stakes and demonstrate how our heroes are progressing and becoming more competent in order to tackle the escalating threats. Any Shonen Jump manga will demonstrate this. Kate Walker isn't some powerhouse who solves her problems with her fists. She's a lawyer who has to think her way through her various challenges. In that regard, Sergei and Igor weren't much of a threat to her, and she easily overpowers them in the end. But this Kate has come through the first part of her development. She's broken away from her life in New York and returned from completing her quest to Syberia. You'd think soldiers from an oppressive regime would be a real threat for her to contend with, but they're just incompetent Saturday morning cartoon villains who can be outrun by a Yukol with a prosthetic leg and won't even fire a warning shot. Like, do you guys know what rucking is? Do you know how hard that shit is? And that's army basic training. What the hell is wrong with these guys? But honestly, for me, the most disappointing part was this guy right here. Detective Nick Canton is the best private investigator on the west coast of the USA. He's the bloodhound that Kate's law firm's sick on her in the second game. He claims he always gets his man, or woman I guess. So he should have been the real antagonist here. He's a man of potential equal intellect to Kate Walker, but in a different field. He could have been laying all kinds of traps and distractions for her. They could have had epic banter as they slowly came to understand they were battling not just an enemy, but a nemesis, before Nick ultimately realized that Kate isn't the criminal he'd been led to believe, and respectfully takes the blemish to his reputation to give up the chase and return home without her, maybe even helping her get the Yukols to their final destination along the way. Instead, we get an awkward, overweight guy with an absurdly wide nose, who easily gets tripped over and his documents stolen by Yukols. Not all the character writing is bad though. Well, this girl is just, you know what, just forget about it. If you don't know, you're better off not. Captain Oboe is one of the best additions to our cast of colourful characters that we meet in these games. He's something of a drunken disgrace when we first encounter him. In the aftermath of the nuclear meltdown in Baranor, a large procession of Oscar-style automatons were hastily prepared at some factory somewhere, and loaded up onto Captain Obo's ship to be taken out there to look for and bring any survivors back. The idea being that automatons wouldn't have to worry about radiation poisoning. However, while he was out there waiting for their return, the captain caught sight of a kraken-like monster in the water and got so scared that he abandoned his rescue plans, raised anchor, and fled back to Valsenborg, leaving any potential survivors to die out there. The Dark Spirit of the Lake, as the Yukols call it, seems to be a well-known urban legend in the area, with everyone having some story or another of a guy who knew a guy who was dragged to their doom by a giant monster. However, it seems that the powers that be are actually aware that the lake really is home to some Loch Ness kaiju-esque creature, as they have these massive gates that not only serve to keep ships in harbour when they don't want them to leave, but also to keep the beast out at night. Apparently they've kept the creature as little more than a myth and a town mascot in order to avoid panic. It's not quite as bad as what people in the Lost Village were doing, I suppose, but it still ranks pretty high on the stupid places video game NPCs choose to settle chart. So after panicking and turning tail over what most people consider a folk tale, Obo was branded a pariah and decided that he'd rather live out his days in the oblivion found at the bottom of a bottle. Kate Walker has to deal with him in order to get the Yukols passage across the lake, and while in the grand scheme of the game we don't actually spend that much time with him, he is easily one of the most memorable characters who goes through this full redemption arc that sees him pull himself together to get his ship working again, while still teetering on the edge of total relapse.
I've made a complete mess of everything again. Again.
Being thrust back into the one place he'd sworn he'd never return, and having the most awesome climactic last stand against the thing that destroyed his life and plagued his nightmares ever since. I was genuinely moved watching him row out into the lake to draw the beast away and give the Yukols a fair chance at escape, and I thoroughly enjoyed this whole section of the game. They also clearly spent the rest of the voice acting budget on Mick Pollock, most famously known for his performance as Dr. Robotnik, to voice him. Or if they did get him for the same price as some of the robotic performers that make up the rest of the cast, they really underpaid him. I think an honourable mention should go to Katrina... How the hell do I say that? Drozdilova. Katrina Drozdilova. She's a survivalist woman we find living in a cute subway car turned homestead beneath Baranor Amusement Park. Since we get to explore her personal living space, we can pick up so much about her in only a brief time. She was an Olympic shot put gold medalist, and the runner-up in a beauty contest. I mean, I don't believe in objective beauty standards, and we were all someone else once, so whatever, right? She and her husband Andre were survivors who were left behind after the meltdown when Captain Obo's ship, the Crystal, sailed away. While Katrina survived, her husband was already too far gone and died of radiation sickness. She also heard a rumour, probably on this radio here that she uses to listen to soap operas, that the survivors who did make it back to Valsenborg were admitted to a clinic and never discharged. So she lives her life here with her clockwork dog, where she can be free to hunt game and be close to her husband. She doesn't have as big of an impact as our good captain, but she's another forgotten soul added to the list of forgotten souls we've encountered on our journey. I've already spent far more time than I'd like talking about this game. I hope I've done a good job of offsetting a lot of my complaints by highlighting the positive aspects too. I don't really think I can recommend this one to you, all things considered though. If you've played everything, including Amazon, and you really just need more Kate Walker and this world, then you'll probably get something out of it. You'll likewise get the complete picture of how Kate Walker went from seeing hands off on the Isle of Syberia at the end of the second game, to slaving away in a forced labour gulag at the start of The World Before. I guess the other big highlight is the return of Oscar. We had thought our best clockwork bro was all but lost after his true purpose was revealed at the end of the second game. However, we learn early in this game that Oscar's memories are actually kept in his heart, and Kate Walker needs only insert it into a compatible automaton to be reunited with him. It turns out just such an automaton can be found in the amusement park in Baranor. We actually get to play a short section of the game as him too, and the DLC is focused entirely on him as it concerns a period in the journey when Nick Canton finally catches up to Kate and spirits her away in the night. We essentially end with the Yukols racing to cross a bridge into the Sacred Lands, while the regime is only a matter of minutes away. Oscar is left behind to operate the bridge, but when something goes wrong, Kate rushes back to try and help him, and while she succeeds in thwarting the regime's plans to... Seriously, I still have no idea what their fucking problem is. She's flown off in their helicopter along with Dr. Olga to whatever ominous fate awaits her in the future. I found this ending to be thoroughly disappointing and frankly, just stupid. It's not a bad way to end the game exactly, but these dollar store Nazis basically did nothing for the entire game, and I'm somehow supposed to think it's some dramatic ending that'll hook me into the next game, just like at the end of the first one. Nah, this ain't it, fam. This ain't it at all. It honestly feels like this story had massive sections chopped out of it. Numerous characters and events are missing context and really need to be fleshed out more, which when you combine that with the lengthy and troubled development cycle, the choppy controls and frame rates, the subpar voice acting and facial paralysis, well, this is starting to look like a game that got stuck in development hell for a long time and pushed out prematurely because someone just didn't want to spend any more money on it. Maybe they thought the brand alone was enough to carry it, and have people overlook the rough edges, or that a reunion with Kate Walker and Oscar would blind fans to how empty and unpolished the rest of the experience is. You know, like how that one movie with the cool blue CGI people managed to trick a massive audience into thinking it wasn't really unoriginal, derivative, and mostly boring. This really ain't it at all. The reviews speak for themselves, and while I've no doubt the hardcore series fans were happy to at least see their favourite characters return, and get some more information on what came next for Kate Walker, everyone felt this was a step down from the lightning in a bottle perfect storm of elements that made those first two games such classics. Sales reflected the response, and in most situations, this would be the end of the series. Microids certainly aren't the worst of the worst when it comes to publishing, but they are a for-profit company at the end of it all, and if something misses hard and tarnishes the reputation of a brand, well, they may want to look elsewhere for their future projects. So we were all more than a little surprised to discover that after Syberia 3, Microids didn't just want another crack at the whip. They were coming back hard to celebrate the series' 20th anniversary, and they meant business. Syberia The World Before began development in 2017, not long after the release of the third installment, and given what an absolute banger of a game it is, we can safely say that the team took a lot of the criticism to heart and used it to drastically overhaul their approach to this one. We've been singing Benoit Sokal's praises left, right and centre since we started talking about the first game, but we have a new name and a face that we need to highlight here, that being Lucas Lagravete. Lucas actually came on board with Syberia 3 and worked as the co-writer with Benoit, but he was elevated to lead writer and game director for this one. He's been quite happy to come forward and do a few interviews for numerous magazines and YouTube channels, and I was low-key thinking about reaching out with a few questions myself, but given he just finished work as creative director on the Amazon remake, and there's some bad news being rumoured about his studio, I think it's safe to say he has his attention very much elsewhere. Lucas has a master's in screenwriting and audiovisual writing. See? Those degrees aren't just for people looking to avoid paying taxes for a few years. And began his career with Microids working on Agatha Christie ABC Murders. I've got to say that as both a developer and a publisher, Microids have some great games under their belt. Robin Hood, those Dracula games, Still Life. You know, I might have to give this Flint game a try too. I know it's got mixed reviews on Steam, but it does look right up my alley. So Lucas was 12 when the first game came out, which makes him about 10 years younger than me. He's also noticeably more handsome, has a mastery of English language that surpasses my Japanese by far, and he no doubt has a higher salary than me. Bro doesn't look like he lifts much though, so I guess I've got that. In this interview here, when he's asked about which entry in the series captured him at first, he talked about how the opening cutscene of the first game really sucked him in, much like it did for myself and I suspect most of the people watching here. It's only a few well-placed camera angles, observing a bizarre funeral procession, but it sums up so much about what the game is about. This is very much something they wanted to nail in this game too, and as we'll soon discover, they succeeded with style. So there was definitely a lot of pressure for the younger writer coming in to help with not only an established brand with a dedicated fan base and something of a big name attached to it, but one he personally enjoyed growing up with himself. Lucas, however, rose to the challenge, and while the release of the first game was a disappointment for everyone, he didn't let that hold him back from taking another crack at things. A lot of the design process was refined this time around. It seems they were using a much older version of Unity when making the third game, which they updated to the most recent version when they began development on the next. They'd also added pressure to themselves by wanting to release the games on both PC and consoles at the same time. This had led to the control support getting a lot more attention than the point-and-click controls, which was, apparently, a sore point for some returning players. So The World Before released for PC first, and was designed so that point-and-click controls and controllers were equally viable options. Also, the considerably shorter development cycle of around 5 years implies a much less turbulent process, and they also released a prologue chapter as a demo from which they got a lot of player feedback. Larian have been doing this with early access for their games since the first Divinity Original Sin, and we all know how that story went.
And the game of the year is Baldur's Gate 3.
By the time of the game's release, the core development team had been transformed into Microids Studio Paris, the very same people who put together the Amazon remake. Unfortunately, at the time of writing, there are reports that this entire team has been laid off. Hey there, Future Arkham here. I'm re-recording this whole segment because of some teething issues I'm having with my microphone, so I may as well bring this up here rather than later in the conclusion like I'd originally planned. There are a couple of articles online talking about the closure of Microids Studios Paris, but on May 19th, we got the announcement of the Syberia remaster, which has a scheduled release date of this year. It seems that despite the rumours, the studio might not be shutting down. At least I hope I'm reading this right, as another studio is also listed on the Steam page along with them. So the good news is we're getting a Syberia remaster, go see the trailer, get excited. And maybe there'll be one more Syberia video this year about that. I don't know yet, it depends on the timing. At this point, it should also be noted that Benoit did leave notes for one more story about Kate Walker to be made, so given that Amazon remake and now this are in the works, we may yet get to see the conclusion to this entire saga. I hope so anyway. Okay, back to our originally scheduled program. Lucas was in contact with Benoit almost every day, and he grew the story of the game out of the core concepts that Benoit put forward. Prior to his death, Lucas said that Benoit had signed off on the final script, and was very happy with the story they were telling. They were also very careful not to have the game slide out of its unique genre. Syberia isn't full clockpunk or steampunk. It's a slight sidestep from our world that switches around some of the names and places so that everything is at once familiar, but there's also enough room to slip in the fantastical. While The World Before is very much about the return of Kate Walker and the continuation of her character arc, it actually takes place in 2 time periods, telling the story of 2 protagonists, and it is one hell of a story. So let's take a bite out of it and look at the start and the setup. Fans of the first 2 games who felt the trademark Vorarlberg automatons didn't have a big enough presence in the 3rd game are going to be very happy with this opening. Even from the first few seconds, we see a gorgeous little tram chugging its way down a very cute European street piloted by one of Hans's inventions. We are in the music district of the city of Wagen in the country of Oosterthal, which exists somewhere in Central Europe. Much like the other fictional locations in all these games, Wagen is a kind of amalgamation of various different European cities that Sokal visited on his many journeys throughout his life. In particular, this place draws from Austria, Switzerland, Czech Republic, and Germany. And it pains me to say I've only ever visited one of these places, and that was at a time in my life too far back for me to really remember much about it. Maybe if this YouTube thing really takes off one day, I can fix that. The year is 1937, and our new protagonist, Dana Rose, is on her way to one of the most important days of her young life. The weather is gorgeous, and the bloom lighting is a little excessive, but it's doing the job of presenting the player with a sense of magic and wonder that has always been the soul of these games. It is also tanking my frame rate for some reason, and I'll get around to that later. Stepping off the train and quickly into our character's shoes, we get to grips with a couple of UI elements, including the journal that can help bring us up to speed on what happened before, and also side objectives. These have been implemented in a you don't have to, but you'll get a little more out of the game if you do kind of way. And I actually got the achievement for hitting them all, so I recommend you go after them because you get more story, and more than anything, I'd say that's what we're here for, right? So that year, 1937. I think we all have some idea of the political climate that was bubbling up in the background, and how drastically things are going to change in Europe 2 years from now. So there's already a dark shadow cast over our narrative. Still, walking down this side street, we see that the demonization of other cultures, in this case Vigarians, is already taking root in this part of the world too. Still, our troubled shopkeeper isn't one to let a rock through a window get him down, and we get to make a choice about what to write in the concrete step he's making for his shop. That is coming back later, isn't it? So with that little ominous detour out of the way, it's time to head to the bandstand for our real intro, and guys, it's a doozy. Returning fans need only take one look at the grand piano at the center of this crowd to know exactly who designed it, and have some idea that this is going to be a hell of a show. After setting a few things in motion, the music begins and oh my god, I was not ready for this. In an interview with Shack News, Lucas said that as a AA game, they really had to pick and choose the moments that were going to have the money spent on them. He said himself it was the opening cutscene of the first game that sucked him in, and he was clearly rolling to do the same here, and well, natural 20 motherfucker. Absolutely mind-blowing. So from the distant past to the not so distant past, we head to 2004 to find out what Kate Walker was up to while everyone was playing KOTOR 2, Fable, and I was obsessively modding Morrowind, chatting on the old Elder Scrolls forums, and just getting started in 3D art. Oh damn, Kashern came out that year too. That is definitely a movie. Anyway, it's bad guys. Kate is now detained in a forced labour mine, and her journal is actually a collection of letters from ace detective Nick Canton directed to her one-time best friend, Olivia. You remember her, right? The superficial girl who, accidentally, wound up sleeping with Kate's asshole boyfriend, and then wanted Kate to be mad at her so she could clear her conscience.
Oh, Kate, you're gonna hate me! Please hate me!
It seems that post-Syberia 3, Nick wound up in the Valsenburg hospital for some months, and when he was finally discharged, the trail had gone cold, but a parcel from Olivia to Kate had turned up there. So Nick finally got back on the hunt and discovered Miss Walker was being detained in this mine run by mobsters and neo-Nazis. Incidentally, this is the only time that word seems to turn up in the game. I didn't read every journal entry, so maybe it pops up again later, but for various reasons the Sokal vs Nazis are the Brown Shadow, which is a not too subtle nod to the colours of their old uniforms. So Kate is fully reaping the consequences of her decisions. By abandoning her old life and cutting off everyone in the West who might have some chance of helping her, she's very much on her own. There may be people who want to look for her, but they don't have a hope in hell of actually finding her. So she's probably here for life, unless she can rustle up and escape. As we go through Kate's morning routine, we also meet her cellmate Katusha, and their interactions imply that going through hell together like this has created a bond that goes far deeper than friendship. Still, Kate's morning routine is thrown into disarray when their guard swings by with a package for her and gives her a chance to open it before they have to start their shift. The contents are about as bad as they could possibly be. There's a letter from Olivia that's no doubt arrived far too late, that informs Kate of her mother's passing and is pleading with her to return for the funeral. There is also an open ticket to fly back to New York. Olivia has also enclosed Kate's mother's pendant, which is also an ingenious tiny little music box. The pendant is very important to Kate Walker, as she listened to it a lot when she was a child, and has never been able to figure out where the tune came from. We even have at least one small flashback scene later in the game concerning it. Of course, Kate Walker isn't going anywhere, and the absolutely devastating news isn't going to earn her a day off in this slave labour camp either. And as she falls into despair, we are transported back to Vargan in 1937 to see what's next for Dana Rose after her magical performance in the town square. This section is something of an extended tutorial. While we should now have all the controls and interactions down, this is our first chance to really rummage around an area, talk to people, and solve a minor puzzle of sorts. The good news is, Dana has found herself a part-time job, helping out in a mountain lodge out of town. She'll be using the money she makes here to help pay for her tuition fees for studies at the musical academy, and take some of the pressure off her parents. It's also here that we discover the Roses run an art dealership, and that's going to be important information for later. And we can first learn about the Vorarlberg connection here too. Hans stopped by Vargan on one of his many adventures across Europe in the aftermath of an absolutely devastating fire. He personally designed the automatons to help with the rebuilding of the city and communicated back to the factory in Valladolid to have them manufactured and shipped over. The bad news though is the influence of the Brown Shadow and their scapegoating has reached a point where it's going to become a personal problem for her family. So we are rushed off back to Kate Walker and Katusha as they smash rocks in this dangerous part of the mine. Kate Walker eventually begins taking her frustrations out on the wall in front of her, and that is when things take a turn.
Kate, watch out! Sorry, I didn't see. Hey, look!
Wow. Isn't this interesting? As well as a handy motorbike that could get us out of here, we discover that this train is full of loot taken by the Brown Shadow from somewhere during the Second World War. And well, if you took the time to examine the paintings in Dana's parents' house, you know exactly where these things came from. Damn. I hope they all made it out okay. As we explore though, Katusha finds something that catches her attention. She's convinced that the girl in the painting is an absolute spitting image of Kate Walker. Our returning protagonist isn't all that convinced though. Still, with the bike repaired and some loot loaded up to make a clean break, they're almost ready to make their escape when...
Hold it right there, girls.
All right. You've caught us.
This whole scene ends in quite a heartbreaking moment that sees Katusha getting shot, Kate braining the guard responsible before she can be throttled, and a very emotionally intense goodbye.
Kate, love you. Remember me, Kate. I'll close my eyes now.
So Kate Walker finally escapes her captivity and proceeds to ride as hard and fast as she can away from one of the worst years of her life, overwhelmed with grief for the loss of her mother and her lover. Let's not mince our words here. These two are in love, and that's a beautiful thing. Katusha making Kate promise to go and find the girl in the painting seems like the delirious words of a dying woman, but with nowhere else to go, Kate Walker decides to set this as her goal, if only to hide from the fact she's running away from the immense grief she's holding inside. Unfortunately, that kind of pain is going to be right behind her the whole way. Even so, our heroine escapes Russia and travels back across Europe to Vargan, where she begins to investigate the mystery of the woman in the painting and facing off against her real enemy, everything she's holding inside. And maybe along the way, being reunited with an old and dear friend one more time. The World Before is a tale of two women. One, a damaged and lost ex-lawyer from New York trying to pull herself back together, and the other, a World War II romance saga. I suppose everyone is going to have their preference here, but I honestly can't tell you which of these two narratives is better. They're both wonderful, compelling, full of interesting characters, moments that tug at your heartstrings, and they still find time to lighten the tone and make us laugh. They also both have some very powerful messages. On one hand, Kate's battle with grief and loss is something I think we can all relate to, and her story is one we can draw inspiration from. Dana's story, on the other hand, gives faces and names to the people who really lose during a war. By playing a Vagarian and interacting with them, we see these minorities used as scapegoats as actual human beings with lives and hopes and dreams of their own, who just want the same chance everyone else has, and not as a faceless threat that we can dehumanize, chase out of their homes, and strip of their rights and property because someone with authority told us it was okay to do that. In both Dana and Kate's time, we get to walk around Vargan as a beautiful city filled with clockwork wonders, reminding us that the real price of war and hate isn't buildings, businesses, or money, but actual human lives. The one thing that when gone, we can never get back. Which brings us all the way back around to Kate Walker and her own grief. Kate lost her mother while she was locked away in some Russian salt mine, run by criminals and neo-Nazis apparently. I mean, I thought they were some kind of official government regime, but you know what, I don't care. See, I told you that's how it went. As such, she couldn't be there for her mother when she fell sick, say goodbye before it was over, or even be at her funeral. Then she lost Katusha right in front of her eyes, when they were both only moments from their chance at an escape and a better life together. Kate is full of regret and loss now, and so are so many of the people in Dana's timeline. It doesn't start that way though. After all, if something is going to come crashing down hard, it needs to go soaring high first. So let's talk about a handsome and dashing man called Leon. The second chapter of the game takes us to a mountain lodge that hikers stay at while on long treks. One seemingly harmless piece of trivia we discover here, that's actually going to become really important later, is that there is currently an excavation of several dead bodies going on in the mountains. It seems that these people died in an avalanche during the Second World War, and their bodies were irretrievable and left to freeze in the ice. However, due to climate change, they've begun to thaw out, and an operation has been launched to remove them from the hiking trails. This place is presided over by an elderly woman with many bad memories from having lived through the Brown Shadow occupation named Demoiselle Lenny. She herself is incapable of using her legs on account of her resistance activities during the Brown Shadow occupation, and is wheeled around in another Vorarlberg-style automaton, and is actually considered something of a local heroine, though she doesn't see it that way. She's the first person we meet who recognizes the girl in the painting as Dana Rose, and even says that she was here at the lodge when it was painted. This launches us into one of the first of the game's extended flashback sequences. It's here we learn about an expedition to find the Gorons. Yes, that was my first thought too, but no, we're talking about Yetis. And given this is a world with a fabled lost island where mammoths stomp around, I think it's safe to say, they're actually out there. We also meet a slightly stuck-up photographer named Junta, and this absolute symbol of European masculinity named the Summer of Mark. Named Leon. There's a bit of a romantic drama here, so I'll quickly abridge it. So, Lenny is the daughter of the owner of the lodge, Herr Gustav, and is somewhat infatuated with Leon. Unfortunately, Junta, this seemingly stuck-up photographer lady, wants to monopolize all his time and take pictures of him in dramatic poses. Leon is training a group of scientists in outdoor survival as they prepare to head to Baltair, nope, not a real place either, but we get the impression it's in East Asia, to find the aforementioned Gorons, and the money for this is coming from... yeah... the things we do for science, right guys? Dana is working here to help pay for her tuition at the music academy, and essentially enchants the pants off everyone, in Leon's case quite literally, with her piano playing, and thus begins her passionate love affair with him, much to the disappointment of Lenny, though Junta doesn't seem to mind. Almost like her interest was strictly professional and maybe she's got something else going on. Leon wasn't actually supposed to be going on the expedition with the science boys, but as we discover from unlocking an elaborate puzzle chest and looking through some old film from back in the time, due to a last-minute injury, their original guide was unable to go and Leon was subbed in. Now, Leon is a genuinely nice guy. It's made very clear that he has all the potential to be a ladies' man and a complete scoundrel if he wants to be, but he's very serious about Dana, and is all in on coming back to be with her as soon as he can, which... I mean, it's 1937. I'm not exactly dropping spoilers if I say something like the world he's leaving behind probably won't be there when he comes back. And well, we've seen that train, so something very ominous is hanging on the horizon. And we know that loss is a huge theme in all of these games, so... yeah... The stage is very much set for our strife-filled World War II romance, and the potential for a very tragic ending. Before we dive into all those spoilers though, let's talk about a few other things. So, do you guys remember this? And this. And now somehow we're here.
Oh, Kate, poor Kate. Now you're on your own. With a train full of treasure.
How the hell did that happen, right? Well, Syberia has always told stories with more mature themes. Ending and loss, and a yearning for things that once were, are a big part of those first two games. The places we travel through are forgotten. The people we meet are full of regrets and longing, but within all that, there was still space for over-the-top villains, petty acts of vandalism, and light-hearted banter with our clockwork conductor. Now we have very serious personal trauma to tackle, and a family drama that's overshadowed by the coming war. That's not to say Syberia The World Before doesn't have its more light-hearted moments, but there is definitely a much more serious tone here, and much of that is focused on Kate Walker's mental state after being used as slave labor for a year, and then, at least from her point of view, losing her mother and her lover on the same day. In the first 3 games, Kate Walker is running towards something. While on a seemingly simple contract signing job, she received a call to adventure. When she first heard about the mysterious lost heir to the Vorarlberg factory, who was supposedly last seen somewhere in Syberia, she could have just cried uncle and returned to New York. Instead, she jumped aboard a wondrous clockwork train and rode it all the way to the edge of the world, cutting away a life that had suffocated her for so long in the process, and embracing the freedom that awaited her on the other side of that. Now though, things are different. Her adventure turned into a nightmare, and with the Yukols gone, she has nowhere to really go to. But the thought of going back terrifies her even more. She is actually quite open about this though. When talking to Lenny at the start of chapter 2, she tells her about her losses, and even says that searching for the woman in the painting has given her a reason to keep going. She's grasping to a floating piece of wood in the ocean with a raging storm all about her. There are several places throughout the game where we can sit down and engage in a little introspection about the last year of Kate's life. Here she'll consider her journey across Europe and the emotional forces that have compelled her along the way. She even has a brief moment where she feels like she's talking to Katusha about her journey, one that ends with this line:
There will always be a train for you.
But there's more to it than that. She doesn't want to face up to the people she cut away or deal with the legal accusations leveled against her. There is an early scene where Kate is unable to sleep and finally calls Olivia. This happens after a dream sequence where we actually see Kate as a young girl and even get to interact with her mother for the first time. Remember, until now, she'd only ever been a voice on the other end of Kate's phone, and quite a sweet one at that. Even as she wakes up and goes to the phone, we can feel that this has been on her mind for ages. There's a section early on where Kate is checking her email and just nukes a bunch of messages from Olivia without reading them, almost like she's trying to avoid dealing with her. As someone who basically binged these 4 games, what happened between Olivia and Dan and how she went about trying to offload her grief onto Kate was still a relatively fresh wound. I hadn't forgiven her, and frankly, didn't consider her worthy of my energy. Kate Walker though, Kate's been through a lot. She's had time to think about this, even regret her decision to run after Hans's train while she swung a pick at the rocks in a salt mine in Russia. The tables have turned in many ways. There are actually 2 ways to handle this conversation, and I basically save-scum my way through seeing both versions. It doesn't go well either way, but far from Kate being the one with the upper hand, Olivia is the one wielding all the accusations now, and we can see Kate really isn't ready to have this conversation by the way she stumbles through her side of it. In the phone calls in the first game, we saw Kate casually referencing some of the absurd events she was living through in the phone conversations to people who had absolutely no context about them, and thought she was maybe going a little off the rails in the process, and that comes back this time too. I won't say Olivia doesn't have any right to feel angry. She doesn't know anything about what Kate's been through, and she got a first-hand look at how that affected her mother before her death. One other area that shows the extent of Kate's grief though is in the first chapter. Here, we are searching for the old shop where the painting came from, and discover it has changed owners and shifted from selling paintings to antiques. The shop owns a Vorarlberg automaton that turns into one of our first clockwork puzzles. Cracking it open lets us insert Oscar's heart into the mechanism, and guess who's back, baby? I am so happy to see you. What?
And Oscar, is everything all right? Oscar? Oscar, come back!
So it would seem there's some sort of programming conflict between Oscar and the hedgehog that leads him to run off and become lost, and just listen to this.
Oscar, please, come back! I need you!
That is some raw fucking emotion right there. God damn, it's heartbreaking. Now, if we jump ahead a couple of chapters, we do get our reunion as Oscar manages to become the dominant intelligence inside the contraption. And well, take a look at this.
I am glad to see you, Kate Walker.
Oscar, oh, I've missed you so much.
I say, this display of emotion is most unreasonable, Kate Walker. I do hope you don't plan such profusion every time I change bodies.
Kate has been clinging to driftwood in a storm, and now at least something resembling an inflatable dinghy has come along. It could still puncture and be lost at any moment, but it's a little bit of hope, comfort, and familiarity, and a sign that maybe this wasn't such a bad idea all along. One big difference between this game and all the others is that we aren't on some big rollicking adventure that spans multiple countries and locations. Rather, we are focused in one city, and we travel around its various districts, visit the mountain ranges that surround it, and dive into its history, with only a brief detour into the Baltia Mountains to discover how the expedition to find the Gorons went. This place is also very much alive too. The locations in the first game were almost like pocket dimensions containing memories of places, while much of the second and third game's locations had this far-flung, isolated feel to them. Baranor, on the other hand, was a ghost town on account of the meltdown. Vargan, however, is teeming with life. From the locals, all rushing around to go about their day, to the many tourists who come to enjoy the old world vibes and like hiking in the surrounding mountains. The whole area is loaded with charm that comes from its beautiful design and art direction and the best graphics this series has seen. Though, I'm not sure what the issue is here, but certain lighting effects absolutely tanked my frame rate, and my PC is well above the recommended specs for this one. I played around with a few settings, but nothing really seemed to do anything, so I just had to live with it. Still, they probably are going a little too hard with the bloom lighting in a lot of these scenes. I understand how it contributes to the vibe they're going after, but maybe dial it down a touch. So, how about a little tour? We begin our adventure in the Antiques District, an adorable little market area full of shops whose stocks of clutter have now spilled out onto the cobbled streets. I was dragged around so many places like this by my parents when I was a kid. Not that I really minded. They do have a mysterious treasure hunter vibe to them. Also, there is one small Easter egg here in this shop with this suit of armor. I wonder if that's the same model with updated materials. Without a doubt though, the jewel of Vargan is its music district. Wow, the Bridge of Mist is pretty cool and is prominently displayed on the game's main menu, but I'm gonna give it to this place just because of all the automatons. There's something of a tragic story about this place concerning a great fire that broke out during a concert where many of the residents had gathered. The fire apparently surrounded the area and ultimately suffocated and burned everyone there, while the orchestra simply continued to play. I feel this story is supposed to be some kind of beautiful tale of passionate artists getting lost in their craft even as the world burns around them. Kinda like Buddhist monks remaining perfectly still in meditation while being burnt alive. But it honestly came across as kinda dark to me, especially because of this automaton violin player, who's kinda central to the whole story. She's supposed to represent the famous violinist who all the people had come to see, and the thing is, I could see her easily standing up one day and going on a killing spree around the city. When we come here in search of information on Dana, we are tasked with repairing the automatons and performing the piano piece one last time. You see, the music academy is all but finished at this point. There are no students, no money, and the sum total of the staff is a full one guy who, like most people we meet in these games, is lamenting the loss of a much grander past when he and the academy actually mattered. In true adventure game style, rather than just ask for money in exchange for his help, he sets us to repair the machines and play the hymn of Vargan that sets the whole mechanism in motion and gives us a full replay of the opening scene, but with our girl Kate now front and center. That is, right up until something snaps in her brain, like some long forgotten memory resurfacing from nowhere, and she's unable to continue. Somewhat late in the game, for reasons I won't get into until we hit those late game spoilers, we are taken on something of a trip to the end of the tram line, to the cemetery found there. Our trip out to the mountain lodge is the first place things get a little whimsical, with Hans flexing the muscles of his mechanical genius to overcome the increase in altitude. The full extent of it comes into play, however, when... well, just see for yourselves, guys. Absolutely magical. Hard to believe this old man with a mammoth fixation left a legacy that can capture hearts and still surprise Kate Walker, even now. Still, I do find it rather creepy that the gates to the cemetery just automatically lock up on the clock with no human oversight to account for people staying late or losing track of time. Whatever. It's there for the game, and it was a fun challenge to overcome. Despite all this grandeur, the game is still created with its limitations in mind. As good as these environments look, we are not exploring some vast, seamlessly connected open world, and thank God, because let's be real, those mostly suck. The city is divided up into various little hubs, and we zip between them on the tram. For the most part though, we are on a linear path and aren't going to be revisiting places we've already been to, unless the story requires us to. I think there's something of a missed opportunity here, as there could have been hidden scenes or minor interactions that played out in certain areas, depending on what point in the narrative we went back there. Shadow of Destiny on the PlayStation 2 did this wonderfully. Being a time travel story that sees you rewriting the future by jumping to the past multiple times, there are tons of little variations and interactions hidden in there. Still, I also understand that adding these things in would have taken time and resources away from polishing the main story and interactions, and if the team didn't have those resources to spare, I wouldn't want to see this suffer for the sake of overreaching. It's just a way I think they could have done more with their world and encourage players to go hunting through it if they had been able to. Since we're talking aesthetics, I should also comment on the massive upgrade we have here in the character models and animations. There's a lot more movement in the facial animations now, and while it sometimes does seem a little mechanical, I'd still take these over the frozen faces we had in the third game. Also, character animations in general are just smoother, and the controls much more responsive. I did have a small issue with Kate Walker's character model this time. I can't quite put my finger on what it is. I think her chin is either too long or just too sharp. I completely understand her looking older and a bit more battle scarred after what she's been through, but the change from the third game is just a bit too abrupt. I kind of want to try and extract the models into Blender and do a compare and contrast to see if I can figure out exactly what it was that was bothering me. Like, come on guys, it's not just me, right? I certainly got used to it by the end, and it's not deal-breaking in any way, but it just bothered me enough to write about it and not edit it out during my read-through, so here we are. Anyway, back to the town. A lot of what we see in Kate Walker's time is only really surface level. Vargan is now something of a tourist town, and while I'm in no way advocating for this place to be bulldozed to make way for progress and modern convenience, it's really all just there for show. I've only visited Germany once, and this was a high school trip that I've more or less blocked from my memory along with the rest of those 5 years. However, I grew up in the UK, and I've seen plenty of antiquated towns and villages there that share some of this aesthetic. I've also been to Rome, where I can recall places with similar vibes, as well as Quebec City in, Quebec? Oh, and a couple of years ago, I also visited Bucharest, and the old town there also captures some of what we see here in this game. Especially in how many of these old buildings are really just facades that house tacky tourist traps that sell overpriced coffee and cheap souvenirs. Not that I'm trashing any of these places. I don't want to completely ruin the illusion for all of you non-Europeans looking to explore our history and culture. They're all very charming in their own ways, providing you don't stick around for too long or squint when you look at this stuff. The best advice I can give you about anywhere you travel to is, as best you can, make local friends. Trust me, you'll have a much better and probably cheaper time. I'm still not 100% sure where I am on the modern narrative adventure game. On one hand, I can tell you that I think Telltale and David Cage style games offer the most weak source mechanics of more or less any game genre. You're basically watching a movie play out and occasionally pressing a button to make it feel like you're doing something. They'll try to imply that the things you do and say will have some larger impact on the future of the narrative, but the simple truth is, you're being railroaded the entire time, and the total output of those decisions will be minimal at best, and just total lies at worst. I mean, do you honestly think every time you got a message saying X character will remember that, or you got that cute balance has shifted pop-up in Dreamfall chapters, that you had actually affected the game? You don't think for a second that maybe absolutely nothing of value happened at all, and that maybe you were just being fucked with? However, none of that changes the fact that I had an absolute blast playing both A Wolf Among Us, the Telltale Batman game, and Fahrenheit. I saw them for what they were, but that didn't change the fact that they all had awesome stories, and I really enjoyed spending my time with... Well, Fahrenheit goes a little off the rails at the end, but it was basically a good game. Another example of games with minimal mechanics are walking simulators. I am a lot softer in my judgment of these because I don't feel like they're trying to trick me into thinking there's anything else going on here. They also do most of their storytelling through their environments rather than dialogue or exposition dumps. I'm kind of a sucker for games that just try to do a couple of things really well like that, rather than, oh, I don't know, jam a pointless stealth section in there? Yes, I'm looking at you, observer. So as long as I get a good story out of it, I'm down to deal with a lot. But even so, games like this do leave me wondering if maybe we can do better. The previous 3 entries all had point-and-click controls, with controller support only being introduced as of the 3rd game. Since modern narrative adventure games are all built around controller support, I played this entire game with a controller from start to finish, and never even realized that there were actual point-and-click controls. It was only when I was watching some interviews about the game's development that I discovered one reason for the game coming to the PC first was that they wanted to have the game optimized for point-and-click controls to appeal to the long-term fans, and then use the extra time before the console release to really lock in the controller functionality. And I'm happy to report that after going back and spending a bit of time playing this as a point-and-click adventure, it works just fine. All the controls are responsive, and the animations are smooth. The game still keeps fixed or tracking camera angles rather than just having an over-the-shoulder camera, but these almost never become a problem like they did in the 3rd game, and the UI elements we see in the game world are far less invasive and ugly than those from the previous game too. It's very clear that this kind of feedback was something the team listened to and worked hard to lock down this time, and they absolutely nailed it in my opinion. I briefly covered some UI elements already in the intro when I talked about this journal. This is where you'll get your list of main and side objectives, though you can bring up a reminder of what these are with a push of a button. There's also a hint button that will see Kate Walker speak her internal monologue out loud and nudge players in the direction of a solution to their current problem. Not that it's ever really that hard to figure out what you need to do. The diary will also function as your inventory screen and let you inspect and interact with items found therein. Some items, such as this key, can be manipulated here and changed so that they can be used with the locks they're supposed to interact with. While our major mechanics are still conversations and puzzles, we are long past the time of long lists of topics that have to be explored from top to bottom to make absolutely sure you don't miss anything, and obtuse inventory puzzles that rely on hiding the objects you need in obscure places in the environment surrounded by only tiny trigger boxes. I also feel like we've made improvements on the 3rd game's idea of having all the other characters essentially boss Kate Walker around through every step of a chapter, and making her feel less like a character with agency and more like everybody's puzzle bitch. As with the 3rd game, there are less topics to cover in a dialogue tree, but each topic in turn provokes a much longer conversation, complete with cinematic camera angles and various events that take place throughout. I think this is fine. It's a nice compromise between having a big list of topics that you laboriously have to work through, and just watching a colossal cutscene like a Metal Gear codec call. I never felt bored or like I was waiting for the game to start again at any point during any of these moments. There are also enough places to visit and characters to interact with in a given scene that I felt like I had some agency in how the story was playing out, versus just watching a movie and occasionally pressing a button. It's the puzzles where this game really shines though. These are something of an improvement on the more interactive puzzles from the 3rd, but they go a lot harder than that. There are 2 main types of puzzle. One is just a gamified version of performing day-to-day tasks. We get one of these quite early on, when we are trying to find businesses that could have been art dealers at one point. We are simply marking on a brochure with a check or an X which ones we think are suitable candidates, and then trying to locate them on a map of the city. There's other stuff like Dana making up a drinks order in her job and having to change one of the barrels in order to complete it. Or, just like in the 1st game, having to call a number. In this case, in order to get a truck moved from an area so that we can get at what it was obstructing. They do that one in A Space for the Unbound too, now that I'm thinking about it. Oh, you like adventure games? Well, here's a 2D indie gem of one that you should absolutely try. Oh, also, I found out in a Reddit thread that when using this telephone, you can actually call all of the phone numbers from the first 2 games, and Kate will have a kind of reaction to doing that. Great little Easter egg.
Bonjour, you've reached the Hotel Meritz. Unfortunately, we are currently unavailable. You can also contact us by going to our website or emailing us.
Hello, Hotel Meritz?
Reception here, can I help you?
I'd like to talk to Mr. George. He's a barman at your hotel.
I'll connect you with the bar. Just a moment.
Then there are the puzzles that lean into the light clockpunk aesthetic of Syberia's world. Hans's contraptions can be found all over Vargan, and you'll have to figure out how to crack more than one of them open before the game is over. One of the earliest of these is figuring out how to open a Vorarlberg automaton so we can insert Oscar's heart into it, and it's really fun. There's buttons to click, dials to turn, codes to figure out, and so on. This method is mimicked all through the game, with elaborate locked puzzle boxes being the meat of the puzzle work here. They have multiple systems to contend with that have different context-specific controls for pressing and moving things, and you'll have to swing the camera around them, focus in and out on various areas, look around for codes or hints, and slowly untangle the threads of this tightly knotted web to finally crack them open and feast on the gooey goodness inside. This method has a very tactile element to it. Rather than just finding the thing and pressing the action button, having to use the analog sticks and move them in circles or in different directions depending on the situation gives an extra dimension to the interaction. There's just something about the feedback you get from what you see on the screen that really sells the illusion. When something was moving slowly, I found myself applying more pressure to the analog sticks, as though I were working against a strong resistance, even though there's no way it could have any effect. I know that the motion control craze is finally done with, but puzzles like this really show that you don't need actual motion controls to give your game a tactile element like this. And while the Wii had a few interesting standouts like Silent Hill Shattered Memories, it wasn't actually offering up anything that unique or special beyond the usual Nintendo suspects. These puzzles remind me a lot of The Room. Oh god, have you guys played The Room? I got the first for my Android tablet way back when I first moved to Japan, and I was absolutely hooked from start to finish. The game has no dialogue or exposition of sorts, just an environment that gets increasingly creepier as you work to unlock this oversized Hellraiser puzzle box. I really need to pick up the others in this series at some point. And one thing I will say here, since I've been talking down motion controls, is I think I got a little extra out of it by using a touchscreen to explore the puzzles this time. You know, thinking about it, it's been long enough that I've probably forgotten how to unlock the box at this point, so I'm about ready for another round. Now for an extra layer of depth, we have the time jump puzzles. In these situations, Kate Walker has obtained information, either notes or a journal entry from Dana, and is reading them to gain access to things she needs to know to solve the puzzle. This is represented by being able to switch to Dana's character and walk around the same area in her time, and see things that are no longer there in Kate Walker's time. In an early example, Kate is trying to access this elaborate clockwork storage box that she doesn't really feel like just taking an axe to. By reading Dana's journal, she's able to locate the hiding place of a key, as it's exactly where Dana left it years ago, and Dana can see various photographs in a dark room that are hung up in a very specific order to make a code for part of the lock. It's a nice enough touch. I'd give it a B-. Not a bad idea, but gets a little frustrating, especially at this part later, when you're trying to fix the Clockwork Orchestra in the music quarter. My guess is there are people out there for whom this kind of thing is really easy, but I just kept going cross-eyed and struggling to remember things I'd seen as Dana only seconds ago. Something about how I'm wired up just made it a little too disorienting. Still, it's a nice moment of mixing the mechanics with the narrative, and better than just having a piece of paper to consult in your inventory to solve the puzzle. As far as difficulty goes, I would say they've nailed the challenge level for people who are here for the story. These things aren't brain teasers that are going to leave you stumped for days on end and have you forgetting where you were in the story by the time you get past them, but they're not laughably obvious either. The only one that really stumped me was this one here, where I had to place the locations of various enemy troops on a map based off some intel letters that I'd read. Wait a minute. I know who this guy is. When it finally came time for me to resort to a guide, I discovered I'd only actually missed placing one of the markers, so I didn't feel too bad about crying uncle on this one. The game could have made it easier for me by telling me exactly which ones I'd gotten right, or worse still, telling me that I couldn't put something in a certain place, but I appreciate that they just presented me with a challenge and left me to deal with it. So overall, I'm going to declare these a complete win. I feel like they achieve what they set out to do. On one hand, they're interesting and challenging, and take advantage of the setting to justify their existence. There's also a couple of interesting quirks, like switching over to Rosa's or Oscar's point of view to solve a puzzle too, that add some extra layers to them. They present enough challenge for me to feel like I'm actually playing a game without blocking narrative progression by being needlessly obtuse or hiding important items in incredibly difficult to locate places. Could we do better? Maybe. But I'd say what we have here works very well indeed. So it's about time to dive into those endgame spoilers and see how they work with our game's themes and character development. Since this is a 2022 game, I feel that 2025 is just a little too early to assume everyone watching this video has already played it and is all in on hearing all about it, like with the other two. So just be aware that there is some good stuff to come, but you're going to get a much bigger impact going through the game yourself to get it. We've got quite a few plot threads to tie up here concerning Leon and his expedition, what became of Dana and her family, and how things went down in Vargan once the Brown Shadow had full control over it. I think we should start with Leon's segment because it really is the catalyst for all of the late game drama. Well, that and World War II. So Leon is out in his element, exploring the mountains of Baltair, but the science expedition led by this arsehole called Reinhardt aren't handling the isolation or sleeping rough very well. Also, winter is moving in, so tempers are starting to flare up. To top it all off, there's been no sign of the Gorons at all, and no doubt their financiers aren't the kind to accept "turns out it was just a made-up folk legend" as an explanation. Not sure what the Brown Shadow wants with a Goron, but maybe they've got their own version of Death's Head in the mix. Things look like they're taking a turn for the better though, when Leon stumbles across an injured Goron and sets about trying to help it. This is where the scientists show their true colours at last. While they seem like quite reasonable friendly types back at the lodge, they clearly don't see this Goron as an intelligent conscious being worthy of care and compassion, but rather as their ticket to a trip home and a payday. This leads to them locking the poor thing up in a cage. That night, however, the noise the distressed creature is making finally draws out one of its parents, and Reinhardt decides a dead specimen is just as appealing as a live one. The ensuing struggle ends with,
"But he's killed Berger!"
So with their meal ticket well and truly lost, the science boys gang up on Leon and tie him up with a view to drag him back to civilization, and blame the whole failure of the expedition on him, and get him tried for murder. Imagine 3 science nerds beating up on a jock. However, this guy Hort feels that they're going too far, and not only helps Leon escape, but also agrees to deliver a final letter from him to Dana. From that point on, Leon becomes lost in the Baltair Mountains, and given his minimal equipment and supplies, the chances of him surviving the winter are minimal, even for an experienced outdoorsman like him. Flash across to Vargan, and when Dana gets the letter, she's found passed out on the floor. This leads to the revelation that she's pregnant with Leon's child, and when it all comes out, her family decide on some rather drastic actions. 1937 wasn't exactly the kind of time where an unmarried woman could be pregnant without there being some kind of massive scandal, and a story was concocted to say that the baby, when born, will be the foster child of a missing relative. They just need to get Dana out of sight until then. So her father calls in a favour with another family, the Zimmers, and they have Dana whisked away to a sanatorium in Switzerland for the duration of her pregnancy. Kate Walker uncovers this part of the story when investigating the Roses' old house on the Bridge of Mists. This is where things start to get very real in general. Here's the thing. We all know that World War II and Nazis are bad. If you don't think so, then I'm afraid this isn't the channel for you. We all know that terrible things happened in both Europe before the war and all over the world during the war. We see memorials everywhere, we learn about it in history, see photos and exhibitions in museums, so we all know this was terrible and should never happen again. But we are also very detached from it at this point. Enough time has passed for the real cost of the war, that being the human lives lost, to become somewhat abstract. The power of stories is giving faces, even fictional ones, to the people who lived through this. Dana Rose isn't just a face in a photo in a history book. She's someone we've spent time with, whose story we've become invested in, and whose well-being we have become attached to. Her family are minor characters, but the fact that their plight affects that of Dana affects us in turn. If you're wondering where all this is going, well, it's because in this chapter we find out about the pogroms that left many Bulgarians dead, and we find the names of Dana's parents on one of the memorials. All of this happened while Dana was away in the sanatorium though. In Kate's time, Dana's old house is an upmarket souvenir shop, but we quickly discover that the restoration work done here is only skin deep. In fact, an entire upstairs floor has just been walled up, which is basically how we're able to access Dana's mostly preserved room, find her diary, and uncover the story of Leon and her baby. What we find in this part of the building though is truly disgusting, and I can't for a second imagine how anyone could commit this kind of action and still consider themselves the good guys in a conflict. I guess Joe Abercrombie had it right when he wrote, "No man capable of greater evil than the one who thinks himself in the right. No purpose more evil than the higher purpose." Now, Kate Walker has been developing the slowly increasing sense that this resemblance she has to Dana is more than just a coincidence, and that maybe she's actually related to her. It's at this point though that she bumps into another old acquaintance of both Dana and Demoiselle Lenny. Frau Junta is by some miraculous coincidence staying at the same bed and breakfast as Kate, but now under the name Colonel Blake. In our first encounter with Junta, the story was being told by Lenny, who saw her as an old busybody monopolizing all of Leon's time, while, when we read about her in Dana's diaries, she's actually quite a nice lady who isn't at all fazed by Leon and Dana's relationship. This is also because she was actually a spy working for the British military. Her Austrian heritage and her status as a famous photographer enabled her to walk freely through brown shadow controlled areas and literally just take photos of everything she saw and take them back to Blighty. Not all heroes wear capes and carry assault rifles. What she's doing back in Vargan, we'll get to that later, though it's related to those bodies in the mountains we talked about earlier, but she's especially interested in Kate's little treasure hunt, and one look at her has her understanding why. Unfortunately, Junta's got some bad news for Miss Walker concerning the baby. This is the part where we actually ride out to the cemetery, and it's one of the last chapters in the game. We are closing in on Kate Walker's last night in Vargan, and a storm is rolling in more than one way. At the graveyard, it's discovered that Dana's health deteriorated rapidly while she was at the sanatorium, and she not only lost the baby in childbirth, but was also sterile thereafter. When she had finally recovered, Junta took her back to the UK with her, where she'd be safe from the Brown Shadow, and where Dana got to work helping the Allies. She's eventually given an assignment to help extract a person of importance from Vargan via the Oosterthal Mountains, an area she's quite well acquainted with, and where we know a bunch of bodies from the war have been recently excavated in Kate's time. Well, this isn't in any way foreboding, is it? As she's working to make contact with resistance cells within Vargan, she sees something that catches her attention.
Edelweiss?
Oh, come here now, my pretty Edelweiss.
And that's all the incentive she needs to Tom Cruise her way back into the arms and life of Leon, who is now leading a resistance cell based in the Mountain Lodge, along with Lenny, who's been using this opportunity to cozy up to him, and Leon's new best friend, and the reason he survived a winter in the mountains alone with no supplies.
The Goran from Baltayar. Well, you've come a long way, Mr.
Ludwig Hardtack.
And our boy has built himself quite the reputation as a symbol of hope against the fascists as well. Frickin' Chad. Look at the way he smokes those cigars like he's Schwarzenegger. To get the last of the story, Kate rushes out to the mountains, even as the storm is just breaking over the town. She has to see the bodies for herself, especially because she now understands that Junta is actually here to help with the identification. Sure enough, we uncover Leon. The ice preserved him almost like stasis, but neither of the other two are Dana, which means it's time to confront Lenny and get the full story. And long story short, I know, too late, right? Lenny's green-eyed monster reared its ugly head when she saw Dana and Leon reunited, and it ultimately led to her selling her people out to the Brown Shadow. In the ensuing firefight, Leon makes a move to extract the VIP, while Dana, Lenny and the Goran hold the front line. The mountain path is hit with ordnance which causes the avalanche, and that's the end of Leon. This immediately sends our boy the Goran into a full-on berserker rage, and it is fucking glorious. I am right there with you, bro. Let's fucking go! Yeah! Fuck Nazis! But that, as they say, is it. Well, almost. The aftermath has a few twists and turns to reveal yet. Lenny keeps her secret and is widely regarded as a hero of Vargan who helped the resistance fight back against tyranny and oppression. Her father, Herr Gustav, we discover, was also a traitor. It's never clearly explained what he did, but when asked about his recent absences, well, a few words imply a lot.
Where were you during the occupation? Lenny never mentioned it.
If you want to know, I was cleared by the military court, Dana.
I also went full Krogan on this piece of shit who was desperate for my attention and showed him my back. He's done. He isn't worth my energy. Not that anyone would mind if I removed his manhood in front of everyone here, but Dana is much classier than that. Despite everything, Dana, like so many who survived the Second World War, can find little solace in the victory when faced against the cost. She lost her family, her baby, her lover, and the world she grew up in has been reduced to rubble. Of course, we see that by Kate's time, the buildings and automatons that give Vargan its unique charm are all restored, but the people who made up the heart and soul of the place are gone. The idea that this place could be safe, secure, and happy is forever tainted by the evils of fascism and war. And so Dana Rose sets sail for America to leave this place as far behind as possible. And if you think we're done with Grand Revelations, well, we still have one more puzzle to crack open, one more letter to read, and one more flashback to see before we're all done. Dana becomes a concert pianist and tours all over the United States in the end. But as her age and the grief of her loss finally catch up to her, she receives another piece of information about her past. Her baby didn't die in childbirth. Dana was unconscious while she was in labor, and arrangements were made for the newborn baby to be handed over to the Zimmers as their baby. They raised her without Dana's knowledge, and she now lives in America as Sarah Walker. Dana goes to the Walker's residence to finally meet her daughter. At the time, there is some kind of party going on with various friends and family in attendance, including the Zimmers. But as Dana looks at her daughter for the first time, she realizes that she doesn't know this woman at all, that she has never been part of her life, and that nothing good could come from invading this space and turning her world upside down like this. And so she decides to leave and go to a place she thinks of as safe and quiet, where she can peacefully live out the remainder of her life. But not before she hears someone upstairs playing the hymn of Vargan on a piano, and goes to see who it is.
She was very studious and didn't seem at all surprised to see me there. She must have thought I was just another guest who had lost their way to the bathroom.
And that's the end of the trail of Dana Rose. Or is it? Dana's story is certainly over. Kate has found out about her real grandmother. It's a story of tragedy and loss and easily rivals her own. In seeing this through, Kate Walker has found the strength to forgive herself and let herself heal. It's going to take time, but she's finally ready to go back to New York and face up to the consequences of her actions. We have a very different phone call with Olivia this time, and as she and Oscar wait for the train to depart, Kate Walker once again receives the call to adventure. In Dana's letters, she discovered that after the war, Leon had planned to return with her and their Goran friend to Baltair and stay with the tribe there. A place far away from the troubles of the world. Somewhere to be at peace. If only there was a train going that way. Fate? Why the hell not? And in a mad dash that mimics the end of the first game, Kate Walker once again leaps aboard a wondrous mechanical clockwork train, joined by another strange eccentric companion who's also finally going home, and rides off to another adventure at the edge of the world. I wonder where she'll end up next time. The release of The World Before marked the series' 20th anniversary, and what a celebration it was. The game received an astounding reception. The Steam page shows reviews from official outlets giving it a solid 8 or 9 out of 10. The game currently sits at a very positive on Steam and has been well received by fans of the series and newcomers alike. They had set out to right the mistakes they made with the third game and produce something worthy of the series' pedigree. In the process, they achieved something thought by many to be impossible. They caught the lightning in the bottle one more time. This game's narrative carries it far beyond the sum of its parts, and given I have fewer complaints about this game than I did the originals, it's arguable they even surpassed those. Wait, no. Pre-rendered backgrounds always win. Sorry guys, better luck next time. Thanks for playing though. I do have to wonder what it was like for a newcomer to the series picking this one up first. This was clearly made for the fans first, and there are a lot of callbacks to the previous games that I think would fly over the heads of someone who hadn't played them. I think this is actually a big problem for many of these older, longer running franchises. 20 years is a long time, and there are people who play games now who weren't even alive when those first two games dropped. Though it does seem like the fans showed up for this one, though it's entirely possible that the third game and the hit the franchise took to its reputation as a result had a negative effect on sales. The world that the game released to was far different from the one we lived in when development started. Lagerbeck and his team certainly weren't looking to make any comments on contemporary events when they began development. They just wanted to do what the series always did and tell a wonderful and heartbreaking story. But by 2022, we'd had everything from the January 6th riots to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the rise of far-right political movements in various countries around the world. They may not have intended anything by their story, and you absolutely don't have to infer anything from it you don't want to. But telling a story of the very real human cost of these ideologies and the hate and violence that rises up around them can have a powerful impact on people. Seeing Kate Walker locked up in a gulag somewhere off the map and forced to slave in a mine every day, quite possibly until she dies for the crime of... Or watching as propaganda turns the easily manipulated into a violent mob who hate you for what they've been told you represent rather than judging you on the actions or your character. Seeing that from the perspective of the persecuted people, and even seeing those people as flawed and complex too, even in a work of fiction, it just makes things all the more real. This is why stories matter. We can go on a journey with people we might not usually associate with. We can understand their points of view without bias because, hey, it's just a story, right? We can see people who hold conflicting ideas to our own as complex creatures with a past and a reason for holding the views they have, rather than as a faceless enemy. As we become emotionally invested in those people and watch them go through their trials, it may very well lead to us questioning things about our own actions towards other people. Stories give us heroes too. Watching Kate Walker wrestle with her grief and slowly come to terms with it all through her journey as she uncovers this mystery and learns things about herself, it's inspiring. It can give us hope that maybe we can fight through our troubles too. The rule of show don't tell is important here too. Don't tell me the Nazis are bad because they hate things. Show me their hate in all its raw ugliness. Nobody told us Kate Walker is a strong, independent woman. In fact, when she shows up at the start of the first game, she's far from being that. Sure, she's educated and seems to have her career all worked out, but her relationships, especially Dan's, are very toxic, and she basically lets her boss use her as a doormat. Fast forward to The World Before, and we've got a woman who's made some real choices with her life, had some experiences both wonderful and terrible, who carries some real scars, and has had to fight some real trauma, and even so, when she hears the call to adventure at the end, she rushes off, probably burning her bridges with Olivia for good this time, and goes in search of her heart's desires. We all have our heroes from our childhood. Those cartoon characters who made us want to be stronger, better, or do the right thing. As adults, I'm sure we've all got a variety of them from various media too. Kate Walker has never been the type to solve problems with her fists or a super shotgun, though there's a few puzzles in some of these games I would have loved to have taken a super shotgun to. Her greatest weapon has always been her mind and her curiosity. She's an adventurer and a tenacious puzzle solver. Even at one of her lowest points, she dedicated herself to solving a mystery and learning the tragic story behind a painting she found by complete chance. Likewise, Dana used her music to inspire others and her mind to aid the Allies in the Second World War. She was even willing to put herself in considerable physical danger despite not being some action hero. Given that the only way to resolve a conflict is either with our words or our weapons, I can't help but think that the world needs more Kate Walkers. We have the power to destroy our world and all life upon it, and I'd hate for this little experiment in complex consciousness to end that way. We need people who are more curious, more open, more accepting of others, and not easily swayed by propaganda that's designed to incite fear and hate. Those people are the ones who are best suited to fight the darkness now. Though, occasionally, we also need a BJ Blazkowicz to put the Nazis in their place. Hey there, Future Arkham here again. Congratulations on making it all the way to the end. It still blows my mind that there are people out there who are happy to sit and listen to me talk about my favourite video games when I spent so much of my youth being told to shut up about it. I suppose that's the good thing about the internet. That was Syberia. 3 amazing games and one that was kind of a mess. Still, the total package, especially on discount, is more than worth it, and I'm hyped for the remaster coming out later in this year, 2025. Usually at the end of my videos I like to tease what's coming next, but because this is a compilation video and I'm not entirely sure when I'll be releasing it, I have no idea what that is. Maybe one of the Baldur's Gates? Don't forget to like and comment. I love hearing about your stories with these games too, and hey, why not hit that subscribe button and help push me over 10k by the end of the year? And maybe also look at some of the real money options to help support the channel. Anyway, I've said enough for now. Have a great day, a great week, and a great rest of the year.